I discovered the truth about my billion-dollar empire in the dirtiest place imaginable. A retail store bathroom at 2 a.m. where a janitor sobbed so hard she couldn't breathe. The corporate reports called this location a model of efficiency. Zero complaints, maximum profit, perfect numbers. But numbers don't tell you about stolen paychecks, falsified schedules, or daughters dying because healthcare was deliberately stripped away. They don't capture the sound of a woman begging God for help while her manager laughs in the break room. I built this company. I thought I knew it. I knew nothing. If you're watching from around the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And stick with me until the end, because what started as one woman's nightmare became the reckoning that changed everything. Daniel Cross had conquered everything money could measure. At 42, his retail empire sprawled across 37 states, employed over 40,000 people, and generated quarterly revenues that made Wall Street analysts salivate. His face graced business magazines. His strategies were taught in MBA programs. His algorithm-driven workforce management system was licensed to 17 other Fortune 500 companies. But standing in the executive suite 70 floors above Manhattan, staring at spreadsheets that reduced human beings to decimal points, he felt the hollow ache that no acquisition could fill. The Riverside location continues to exceed all benchmarks, his CFO, Marcus Chen, announced during the morning briefing, pulling up a dashboard that glowed green across every metric. Labor costs down 18% year over year, inventory shrinkage at record lows, customer satisfaction scores above regional average. Whatever they're doing there, we should replicate it system-wide. Daniel leaned forward, studying the numbers with the intensity that had built his fortune. Riverside was a mid-sized store in a working-class neighborhood outside Philadelphia, not the kind of place that typically generated exceptional performance. The demographics suggested high turnover, significant theft risk, chronic staffing challenges. Yet somehow, this location hummed like a perfectly calibrated machine. "Schedule a visit," Daniel said quietly, "but don't announce it. I want to see the operation as it actually functions, not a performance staged for corporate inspection." Marcus exchanged glances with the VP of Operations. "Sir, the standard protocol—" "I know the protocol," Daniel interrupted, his voice carrying the steel that had intimidated boardrooms for 2 decades. "I created the protocol, and I'm telling you, I want to see this store the way a customer sees it. No advance warning, no cleanup crew, no managers rehearsing speeches." "When were you thinking?" Daniel checked his Rolex, a gift from a board member after the last acquisition. "Tonight. The overnight shift. That's when you really see how a store operates." The strategy wasn't entirely altruistic. Daniel had been feeling the creeping disconnection that plagued many executives who spent too long in corner offices. The numbers were beautiful, but they were abstractions. He wanted to touch the machinery of his empire again, to remember what retail actually felt like at ground level. Call it nostalgia for the days when he'd worked stockroom floors to pay for community college, or call it the restlessness of a man who'd climbed every mountain and found the view disappointingly empty. That evening, he traded his Tom Ford suit for items purchased at a discount chain: cheap jeans, a faded jacket, scuffed work boots, and a baseball cap pulled low. In the bathroom mirror of his penthouse, he barely recognized himself. The disguise was surprisingly effective. Without the tailored clothing and confident posture of wealth, he looked like any middle-aged man fighting to stay employed in an economy that chewed up workers and spit out the bones. The drive to Riverside took 90 minutes through neighborhoods that never appeared in tourism brochures, strip malls with half the storefronts vacant, apartment complexes with playground equipment that had rusted into sculptures of neglect, payday loan shops clustered like predators around every intersection. This was the America that existed in the footnotes of his quarterly reports, the labor pool that kept his profits soaring, the consumer base that bought discounted goods with credit cards they couldn't afford to pay off. The store itself occupied a former warehouse, its parking lot cracked and weedy. Even at 10 p.m., a handful of cars clustered near the entrance, vehicles held together with prayer and duct tape, the kind of transportation owned by people who couldn't afford for anything to break down. Daniel parked his deliberately unremarkable rental sedan and walked toward the fluorescent glow. Inside, the overnight crew was already at work. A handful of employees moved through aisles with the mechanical efficiency of people who'd performed these tasks 1,000 times, restocking shelves, running price checks, cleaning floors that would be dirty again by morning. Nobody looked up as Daniel entered. Invisibility, he realized, was the default state for people like the person he was pretending to be. The store manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, glanced at him from behind the customer service desk. "Help you find something?" "Just browsing," Daniel replied, keeping his voice neutral. He'd perfected the ability to blend into rooms, to become forgettable when advantage required it. The skill served him well in boardroom politics. Tonight, it let him disappear into the landscape of his own company. For the first hour, he simply observed. The operational efficiency was indeed impressive. Inventory moved smoothly. Displays were maintained. The few customers who wandered in at this hour were processed quickly. But Daniel's trained eye caught details the dashboards couldn't measure. The way employees moved with the tension of people constantly monitored, the absence of casual conversation, the brittle atmosphere that suggested fear rather than engagement. And then he noticed her. A woman in a custodial uniform, dark blue coveralls with his company's logo embroidered over the heart, pushed a cleaning cart with the slow deliberation of someone utterly exhausted. She was perhaps 40, Hispanic, with her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Even from across the store, Daniel could see the weight she carried, and he didn't mean the physical burden of the cart. This was the exhaustion that went bone deep, the kind that sleep couldn't cure because it came from circumstances rather than exertion. She worked methodically through her route, emptying trash bins, wiping down surfaces, mopping floors. Nobody acknowledged her. She might as well have been a robot, another piece of equipment performing its programmed function. Daniel felt an unexpected pang watching her invisible labor. How many people worked for his company in exactly this way, essential but unseen, crucial but uncredited? He was about to move to a different section when the woman abruptly abandoned her cart and hurried toward the back of the store, her pace shifting from methodical to urgent. Something in her body language triggered his instincts, the sudden change, the barely controlled panic. Without conscious decision, Daniel followed at a distance. She disappeared into the family restroom near the storage area, the door closing with a soft click. Daniel hesitated, aware that following a woman into a bathroom violated every social contract. But that same instinct that had built his fortune, the ability to sense when something was profoundly wrong, kept him rooted near the door. And then he heard it. Crying. Not the brief tears of frustration or the sniffles of a bad day. This was the sound of someone breaking apart, ragged sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief. This was the sound of absolute despair, the kind that emerged when every reserve had been exhausted and nothing remained but the raw wound of existence. Daniel stood frozen outside that door, listening to a stranger's agony, and felt something crack open inside his chest. All the spreadsheets in the world couldn't capture this sound. All the efficiency metrics and profit margins meant nothing compared to whatever was happening behind that door. The crying continued for several minutes, long enough that Daniel began to worry about intervention, about whether someone was physically hurt or in medical crisis. Finally, the sound subsided into exhausted silence. Water ran. More silence. Then the door opened. The woman emerged with her face washed but still puffy, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She saw Daniel standing nearby and froze, terror flashing across her features. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, automatically, the reflex of someone who'd learned to apologize for existing. "I'm going back to work right now. Please don't report me, please." "Hey, no," Daniel said softly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not. I was just passing by. Are you okay?" She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Do I look okay?" "You look like someone carrying the whole world," Daniel replied honestly. "I'm Daniel. I'm new here. Night stock crew." The lie came easily, smoothly. She studied him with the wariness of someone who'd learned that kindness often concealed traps. But exhaustion made people careless, and she was clearly beyond the capacity for sustained caution. "Elena," she said finally. "Custodial, 3 years." She wiped her face again, though no tears remained. "You should get back to work. They monitor the security cameras. They'll notice if you're not moving." "They monitor that closely?" Elena's laugh held no humor. "They monitor everything. time on task, productivity metrics, how long you spend in the bathroom. Rick, he's the assistant manager. He keeps a spreadsheet. He knows if you take an extra minute on break. Daniel felt ice crystallize in his stomach. The workforce management system he'd commissioned was sophisticated, yes. Tracked labor hours with precision, optimized scheduling, measured performance. But it wasn't designed for surveillance at this granular level. Someone had weaponized his tools. That seems excessive, he said carefully. That's retail. Elena picked up her cart, preparing to resume her invisible labor. You'll learn. Wait, Daniel said, surprising himself. Elena, what happened? Just now, I mean. You don't have to tell me, but... He gestured helplessly. Nobody should have to cry like that alone. For a long moment, he thought she'd walk away. Her face closed, shuddering against vulnerability. But then something shifted. Maybe the late hour. Maybe the fact that Daniel was a stranger who'd never see her again. Maybe simple human need to be witnessed in her pain. My daughter, Elena said, her voice cracking. Lucia. She's 9. She has a heart condition, cardiomyopathy. She needs surgery, soon. The doctors say within the next few months, or... She couldn't finish the sentence. That's terrifying, Daniel said quietly. But surely the insurance... Elena's face twisted. I don't have insurance. Not anymore. How is that possible? The company offers full benefits to all employees working over 30 hours. I work 29, Elena said flatly. Every week, 29 hours. Rick makes the schedule. He keeps everyone just under the threshold. No benefits, no insurance, no sick time. Maximum flexibility for the company, minimum cost. Daniel's brain, trained to process complex business operations, immediately understood the strategy. It was technically legal, barely. Companies could classify workers as part-time to avoid benefit obligations. But this wasn't the strategic workforce management he'd envisioned. This was systematic exploitation hiding behind plausible deniability. But you've been here 3 years, he protested. Why haven't you gotten more hours? I've asked. Elena's voice dropped to barely above whisper. Every week for 3 years I've asked. Rick says it's not available. But then he'll give 35 hours to his nephew who started last month, or to that college girl who flirts with him. The rest of us, she shrugged helplessly. We're kept right at the edge, desperate enough to accept anything, too poor to quit. That's illegal, Daniel said, his executive mind already cataloging labor law violations. Is it? Elena's eyes met his with devastating directness. Because it happens every day. And who's going to fight it? I need this job. Lucia needs whatever money I can make, even if it's not enough for insurance, even if it's not enough for surgery, even if it's just enough to keep us fed while she gets sicker. Her voice broke. What kind of mother can't save her child? The question hung in the stale air of the retail back hallway, unanswerable and enormous. You're working other jobs? Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. 2 more. Morning shift at a diner, weekend nights cleaning offices. 70 hours a week total, but nobody will give me enough hours in one place to qualify for benefits. It's the same everywhere now. Keep everyone part-time. Keep everyone desperate. Keep everyone disposable. Daniel thought of the efficiency metrics from this morning's briefing. Labor costs down 18%. Of course they were down. You didn't have to pay benefits to part-time workers. You didn't have to provide health care or sick leave or stability. You could staff an entire store with people like Elena, people working themselves to death across multiple jobs and still drowning. The surgery, he said. How much does it cost? $85,000. Elena said it like a death sentence. I've saved $3,000 so far. At this rate, by the time I have enough, Lucia will be... She couldn't say it. The hospital will do it as emergency surgery if she codes. But then it's trauma medicine, not planned intervention. Her survival chances drop to 50-50. Daniel's mind raced through calculations. $85,000. He'd spent more than that on a watch. He'd authorized bonuses larger than that for vice presidents who'd met quarterly targets. His company had reported profits of $4.7 billion last fiscal year, and this woman's daughter was dying because of an algorithm that kept her scheduled at 29 hours. There has to be something, he said. Charity care, payment plans. You think I haven't tried everything? Elena's voice rose, frustration finally cracking through her defeated exhaustion. I've applied for every program, every grant, every charity. They all have waiting lists longer than the time Lucia has left. Or they require documentation I can't provide. Or they cover partial costs, but not enough. The system isn't designed to help people like me. It's designed to extract every drop of labor and then discard us when we're used up. She grabbed her cart with renewed urgency. I have to finish this section before Rick does his walkthrough at midnight. If he catches me behind schedule, he'll write me up. 3 write-ups and I'm terminated. Wait, Daniel said. This Rick? He's that strict? Elena's expression shifted to something darker. Strict isn't the word. Rick Halden runs this store like his personal kingdom. He decides who gets hours, who gets written up, who gets to keep their job. And he enjoys it, the power over people who can't fight back. Corporate doesn't monitor him? Corporate loves him. His numbers are perfect. Labor costs down, shrinkage down, customer complaints down. Nobody asks how he achieves it. Elena's voice turned bitter. People like me don't show up in corporate reports except as efficiency gains. She started to push her cart away, then paused. Thank you for listening. Nobody usually does. We're invisible here, just bodies that move product and clean floors. But be careful, Daniel. If you're new, Rick will test you. He'll find your weakness, whatever you're desperate for, and he'll use it. That's how he maintains control. Daniel watched her disappear into the aisles, her cart squeaking slightly with each push. Around him, the store hummed with its overnight rhythm, the beep of scanners, the rustle of cardboard, the buzz of fluorescent lights. Everything looked efficient, orderly, successful. But he'd heard the crying behind the door. He'd seen the numbers behind the numbers. For the next several hours, Daniel worked the night stock crew, his disguise holding. He unloaded trucks, organized inventory, learned the physical reality of the empire he'd built from spreadsheets and strategy sessions. His back ached, his hands cramped. The work was mind-numbing and relentless, and he was doing it for one night as an experiment while people like Elena did it indefinitely as survival. Around 11:45 p.m., the assistant manager emerged from the back office for his walkthrough. Rick Halden was exactly what Daniel had feared. Mid-30s, Jim muscular, with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd discovered that cruelty could be profitable if packaged as efficiency. He moved through the store with proprietary swagger, checking displays, monitoring workers, radiating the casual menace of petty authority. "Elena," he barked, spotting her near the pharmacy section. "This floor is still wet. How many times do I have to tell you about safety protocols?" Elena appeared immediately, moving with the trained urgency of someone conditioned to fear. "I mopped it 15 minutes ago, Mr. Halden. The sign is right there." "I don't care about signs. I care about customers who might slip and sue us." Rick leaned closer, his voice dropping to a tone that somehow carried more threat at lower volume. "Maybe if you spent less time hiding in the bathroom crying and more time doing your actual job, we wouldn't have these problems." Daniel's hands clenched around the box he was holding. So Rick knew about the bathroom, which meant he'd been watching the security footage, which meant Elena's moment of private agony had been observed and cataloged as a performance failure. "Yes, Mr. Halden," Elena said quietly, eyes downcast. "I'll be more efficient." "See that you are?" "And Elena?" Rick's smile was predatory. "I'm reviewing the schedule for next week. There have been some concerns about your reliability. You might find your hours adjusted." The threat was clear. Elena's face went pale. "Please, Mr. Halden, I need those hours. I can't." "Then maybe you should demonstrate the kind of commitment that earns hours." Rick let the implication hang in the air. Ugly, transactional, unspoken, but understood. "Now get back to work." He walked away, leaving Elena shaking. Daniel wanted to follow Rick into the back office and explain exactly who owned this company and what was about to happen to managers who threatened vulnerable employees. But his executive training held. You didn't act on partial information. You gathered evidence. You built an airtight case. And then you destroyed the people who'd weaponized your vision. Daniel approached Elena after Rick disappeared. What he said, "Don't," Elena interrupted, her voice tight. "Don't tell me to report him. Don't tell me to go to HR. You're new. You don't understand how it works. Rick is untouchable. His numbers are perfect. I'm nobody. If I complain, I lose this job and get blacklisted from every retail position in the region. That's how it works for people like me. People like you. Poor people. Immigrant people. People who need the job more than the job needs them. Elena's eyes were hard now, the tears burned away by resignation. The system isn't broken, Daniel. It's working exactly as designed. We're supposed to be desperate. We're supposed to be grateful for 29 hours at minimum wage. We're supposed to shut up and accept it. She walked away before Daniel could respond, her cart squeaking into the distance. The rest of the night passed in a blur of physical labor and mounting fury. Daniel watched Rick make his rounds, observed the fear that rippled through the staff at his approach, noted the careful way everyone avoided direct eye contact or conversation that might be construed as resistance. This wasn't management. This was tyranny, masquerading as efficiency metrics. At 6 a.m., when the overnight shift ended, Daniel clocked out with the rest of the crew. In the parking lot, he watched Elena climb into a vehicle that had no business still running, a 15-year-old sedan with mismatched panels and a passenger window held up with plastic sheeting. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, her head bowed against the steering wheel, gathering strength for whatever came next. The diner shift, Daniel realized. She was going straight to her next job, no sleep, no rest, just an endless grind that still wouldn't be enough to save her daughter. He sat in his rental car as dawn broke over the strip mall, painting the discount store in shades of rose and gold that made it look almost beautiful. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with messages from Marcus about quarterly projections, from his executive assistant about board meeting preparations, from analysts about market movements that would shift millions of dollars with each decimal point. But all he could hear was Elena crying behind that bathroom door. All he could see was Rick Halden's predatory smile. All he could think was how many Elenas existed across his empire, trapped at 29 hours, fighting impossible battles against a system that had learned to profit from their desperation. Daniel had built this company on principles of efficiency and optimization. He'd created algorithms that maximized profit and minimized waste. He'd believed that smart business practices elevated everyone, that profitable companies created opportunity and prosperity. But somewhere between the corner office and the floor, those principles had been corrupted. Someone, many someones, had discovered that the machinery of efficiency could be used to grind up human beings instead of elevating them. That workforce management systems could become surveillance and control. That the optimization of labor costs could mean the systematic denial of healthcare to women whose daughters needed heart surgery. He'd built the machine, but he'd lost control of what it was doing. And now, sitting in a parking lot as the sun rose over a world that looked nothing like his spreadsheets, Daniel Cross made a decision that would change everything. He was going to stay, not as the billionaire CEO doing a performative inspection, not as the executive gathering information for a sanitized internal review. He was going to remain undercover, embedded in his own company, and he was going to see exactly how deep the rot went. And when he finally revealed himself, when he finally brought the full weight of his authority to bear, he wasn't going to issue memos or launch initiatives or create new oversight committees. He was going to burn this entire toxic culture to the ground and rebuild it from the ashes. But first he needed evidence. He needed to document the undocumented, the wage theft, the coercion, the deliberate harm inflicted on people who had no power to fight back. He needed to make it impossible for anyone to claim this was an isolated incident or an unfortunate misunderstanding. He needed to stay invisible just a little longer, because sometimes the only way to see the truth about your empire is to stand at the bottom and look up, and sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to break it completely first. Daniel spent the following day in his penthouse, but his mind never left that parking lot, never stopped replaying Elena's broken voice or Rick Halden's predatory smile. He'd canceled his morning meetings with a vague excuse about food poisoning, ignoring the concerned messages from his assistant. Instead, he sat at his home office desk, pulling up every piece of data he could access about the Riverside location without triggering alerts that would reveal his interest. The numbers told one story: brilliant efficiency, minimal costs, maximum productivity. But Daniel had learned to read between the lines of his own reports now, to see the human cost embedded in every percentage point. Labor costs down 18%. That meant people like Elena, kept deliberately at 29 hours. Turnover below industry average. That meant employees too desperate to quit, trapped by circumstances. Zero formal complaints. That meant fear had been weaponized into silence. He opened his laptop and began creating a secondary identity, something more substantial than the cheap clothes and fake name he'd used last night. Within hours, using contacts who asked no questions, he had a complete background. Daniel Morse, 42, recently laid off from a warehouse job in Pittsburgh, relocating to the Philadelphia area for a fresh start. References that would check out. Employment history that looked real, even a sparse social media presence that suggested a man down on his luck but trying to rebuild. That evening, he returned to the Riverside store, this time during the shift change when Rick Halden would be in the office processing paperwork. He approached the tired-looking manager at the customer service desk. "I'd like to apply for a position," he said, channeling the careful desperation of someone who needed work but couldn't appear too needy. "Overnight stock or whatever you have available." The manager, her name tag read Sandra, looked him over with the weary assessment of someone who'd hired and fired countless bodies. "You have retail experience?" "Warehouse work mostly, but I'm a fast learner and I need the hours." Daniel let a hint of desperation bleed through. "I can start immediately." Sandra pulled out a tablet and began entering information. "It's minimum wage, part-time only, no benefits. Schedule varies week to week based on business needs. You okay with that?" "How many hours we talking?" 25 to 30, typically. Sandra's tone was practiced, professional. She'd delivered this speech hundreds of times. "Depends on performance and availability. 25 to 30. The same trap that held Elena. Daniel nodded as if this was acceptable, as if it was what he'd expected. "That works for me." The application process was perfunctory. Basic information, availability confirmation, drug test consent. Sandra barely looked at his fake references, and Daniel realized that for positions like this, the company didn't bother with thorough vetting. The turnover was high enough that extensive background checks weren't cost-effective. Bodies were interchangeable, easily replaced. "You can start tomorrow night," Sandra said, handing him paperwork. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Report to Rick Halden. He's the assistant manager for overnight operations. He'll get you set up. Daniel thanked her and left, his anger crystallizing into cold determination. Tomorrow night he would officially become part of the system he'd created, subject to the same algorithms and management structures that were crushing people like Elena. And he would document every single violation, every instance of exploitation, every moment when profit was prioritized over human dignity. But first, he needed to understand Elena's situation more completely. That night he used resources available only to someone with unlimited wealth and zero ethical constraints, hiring a private investigation firm to compile a comprehensive report on Elena Morales. By morning, he had her complete story spread across his desk in brutal detail. Elena had immigrated legally from Mexico 12 years ago, following her husband Miguel, who'd found work in construction. They'd had dreams, modest dreams, American dreams, a stable home, good schools for their daughter, maybe someday a small business of their own. But Miguel had died in a workplace accident 5 years ago, killed when scaffolding collapsed on a job site where safety regulations were treated as suggestions. The construction company had paid a minimal settlement, barely enough to cover the funeral and 1 year's rent. Since then, Elena had been fighting alone. She'd taken every job available, working herself to exhaustion while Lucia grew sicker. The cardiomyopathy had been diagnosed 2 years ago, a genetic condition, progressive and ultimately fatal without intervention. The surgery Lucia needed was specialized, available at only 3 hospitals in the region, and prohibitively expensive for someone without insurance. Elena had no family in the United States who could help. Her parents were elderly, still in Mexico, surviving on remittances she could barely afford to send. Miguel's family had distanced themselves after his death, viewing Elena as a burden rather than an obligation. She existed in that particular American limbo, working constantly but earning too little, needing too much but qualifying for too little assistance, trapped in a system designed to extract labor while providing minimal support. The medical reports were devastating. Lucia's condition was deteriorating faster than the initial prognosis suggested. The cardiologist's notes were filled with phrases like urgent intervention needed and limited window for optimal outcomes. Without surgery within the next 8 weeks, Lucia would likely need emergency transplant instead of repair, a far riskier procedure with significantly lower survival rates. Daniel sat in his penthouse surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt obscene, reading about a 9-year-old girl dying because his company's scheduling algorithm kept her mother at 29 hours. The direct causation was undeniable. If Elena had full-time status, she'd have health insurance. If she had health insurance, Lucia would have surgery. If Lucia had surgery, she'd live. The math was simple and brutal. He could write a check right now, he realized. $85,000 was nothing to him. Lunch money, a rounding error in his quarterly budget. He could solve Elena's crisis with a phone call, have his foundation cut a check for Lucia's surgery, transform their lives with the stroke of a pen. But that would be charity, not justice. That would save one girl while leaving the system intact to destroy countless others. Daniel hadn't built a multi-billion-dollar empire by solving symptoms instead of root causes. If he was going to fix this, he needed to fix it completely, which meant he needed evidence that would be undeniable, documentation that would make reform mandatory, proof that would eliminate any possibility of this exploitation continuing. The next night, Daniel returned to the Riverside store as an official employee. Rick Halden met him in the back office, clipboard in hand, assessment cold and calculating. "Daniel Morse," Rick said, looking him over with the predatory evaluation of someone sizing up potential weakness. "Sandra says you need hours badly. That true?" "I need work," Daniel replied carefully. "I'm reliable, show up on time, do what's asked." "Everybody says that in the interview." Rick leaned back in his chair, radiating casual authority. "What I need to know is whether you understand how things work here. We run a tight operation, high standards, no room for slackers or complainers. You got a problem with that?" "No problem at all." "Good. Because I'll be straight with you. I control the schedule around here. You want hours, you earn them. You want to keep your job, you make me happy. You understand what I'm saying?" The implication was clear, the threat barely veiled. Daniel nodded, playing the role of desperate worker who couldn't afford to push back. "I understand." "Excellent." Rick's smile was reptilian. "You'll start with overnight stock. If you perform well, maybe we increase your hours. If you cause problems—" He let the sentence hang, the consequences unspoken but understood. "Let's get you set up." Rick led him through the store, explaining procedures with the tone of someone who enjoyed wielding petty power. The security cameras were emphasized repeatedly, how they monitored everything, how footage was reviewed, how any deviation from policy was documented and punished. The message was clear. You are always being watched, always being evaluated, always one mistake away from termination. They passed Elena in the cleaning supplies aisle. She glanced up, saw Daniel with Rick, and her expression flickered with something like warning before returning to neutral subservience. "That's Elena," Rick said dismissively. "Custodial. She's been having performance issues lately. Too much time off task, too many personal problems affecting her work. I'm considering schedule adjustments." He said it loud enough for Elena to hear, a deliberate psychological tactic. Can't let personal drama interfere with business, right? Daniel forced himself to nod, to play along, even as fury burned through his chest. This was how Rick maintained control. Public humiliation, constant threat, the weaponization of economic vulnerability. And it worked because people like Elena had no alternatives, no safety net, no power to resist. The training shift was deliberately grueling. Rick assigned Daniel to the heaviest physical tasks, unloading trucks, moving pallets, reorganizing warehouse sections that required constant lifting and climbing. It was a test, Daniel realized, a way to determine whether the new hire would accept impossible conditions without complaint. Several times, Rick appeared to observe, watching with arms crossed, waiting for Daniel to slow down or request assistance. Daniel gave him nothing. The physical labor was exhausting, especially for someone whose daily exercise routine usually involved elliptical machines and personal trainers, but he pushed through with the determination that had built his empire. He would not show weakness. He would not give Rick ammunition. Around 2 a.m., during the scheduled 15-minute break, Daniel found himself in the employee break room with 3 other overnight workers. They spoke in the careful way of people who knew they were being monitored, conversations scrubbed of anything that might be construed as complaint or criticism. "You'll get used to it," said a young man named Marcus, maybe 22, with the exhausted eyes of someone older. "First few weeks are brutal. Rick breaks in all the new people the same way, works you until you quit or prove you'll accept anything." "He always like this?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice casual. The three workers exchanged glances, a silent communication about how much truth could be safely shared. Finally, an older woman named Betty spoke up. "Rick runs this place like it's his kingdom. Corporate loves him because the numbers look good, but working here?" She shrugged. "It's survival, not employment." "What about going to HR?" Daniel ventured. "If conditions are that bad, HR protects the company, not us," Marcus interrupted, his voice bitter. "File a complaint and suddenly your schedule gets cut, or you're written up for minor violations, or you're terminated for performance issues that were never problems before. The system isn't designed to help workers, it's designed to maintain control." Betty nodded. "Most of us are just trying to get through each shift. Keep your head down, don't make waves, take what hours you can get. That's the reality of retail now." But Daniel absorbed this, adding it to his growing understanding of the toxic culture that had metastasized within his company. These weren't isolated incidents or rogue managers. This was systemic, a deliberate structure that maximized profit by minimizing worker power. "What about Elena?" he asked, careful to sound merely curious. "I saw Rick talking to her earlier. She in trouble?" The three workers' expressions darkened. "Elena's been on Rick's target list for months," Betty said quietly. "Her daughter is sick, really sick. She's been asking for more hours to cover medical expenses, but Rick keeps denying her. Says her performance doesn't justify full-time status." "Her performance is fine," Marcus added. "Better than fine. She works harder than anyone here. But Rick likes having leverage over people, and Elena's desperation makes her easy to control. It's disgusting, but that's how it works." Before Daniel could respond, Rick appeared in the doorway, his presence ending the conversation immediately. "Break's over. Back to work. And Daniel, I need you on aisle reorganization. The end caps need to be reset before the morning shift arrives." Daniel spent the next 3 hours rearranging displays according to specifications that seemed designed more for difficulty than efficiency. His back screamed, his hands cramped, but he maintained the pace, documenting everything mentally. Every unreasonable demand, every impossible standard, every moment when the job crossed from difficult into deliberately punitive. At 4 a.m., he witnessed the wage theft firsthand. Rick announced a mandatory all-staff meeting in the break room, pulling everyone off the floor for what he claimed was a 15-minute safety briefing. But the meeting stretched to 35 minutes, while Rick droned through policies everyone already knew. And when it finally ended, he made a point of telling everyone to adjust their timesheets to reflect only the scheduled break time. "Company policy says meetings under 30 minutes aren't compensated," Rick explained with a smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing. "So make sure your punches reflect the standard break, not the meeting time. We don't want any time card discrepancies." Daniel watched his coworkers comply without protest, manually editing their hours to show less time than they'd actually worked. It was wage theft, pure and simple. 20 minutes of labor stolen from people who couldn't afford to lose a single dollar. Multiplied across the staff, across shifts, across weeks, it added up to thousands of dollars diverted from workers' pockets into the company's profit margins. And this was just one night, one store, one manager. How many Rick Haldens existed across his empire, discovering that the easiest way to reduce labor costs was simply to steal from people who had no power to fight back? After the meeting, Daniel approached the time clock, his phone positioned carefully in his jacket pocket with the camera activated. He captured the timesheet editing process, the wage theft documented in real time. It wasn't enough yet. He needed more evidence, more patterns, enough to prove this was systematic rather than isolated. Near the end of the shift, he found Elena in the storage area, cleaning shelves with the mechanical efficiency of someone performing tasks on autopilot. She looked even more exhausted than before, if that was possible. "How's your daughter?" Daniel asked quietly, checking to make sure they were alone. Elena's hand stilled on the shelf. "Why do you care?" Because I listened to you cry in that bathroom, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. She turned to face him, her expression guarded. You should forget what I told you. People here don't help each other. They can't afford to. Everyone's barely surviving. If you get involved in my problems, Rick will target you too. Maybe I'm okay with that. You're not. Elena's voice was firm. You just started. You still think there's fairness here, still believe the system might work if you just navigate it correctly. But there is no navigation. There's only submission or termination. How much time does Lucia have? Daniel asked directly. Elena's face crumbled for a moment before she rebuilt her composure. 6 weeks, maybe 8. After that, the damage becomes irreversible even with surgery. She'll need a transplant instead, and the waiting list for pediatric hearts. She didn't finish. The statistics spoke for themselves. I want to help, Daniel said. You can't. Nobody can. Elena picked up her cleaning supplies, preparing to move to the next section. Just survive your own situation, Daniel. That's all any of us can do. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him alone with his fury and his plans. The shift ended at 6 a.m. with another time manipulation. Rick had scheduled the overnight crew until 6, but as closing time approached, he announced that everything needed to be merchandising ready before anyone could leave. Displays perfect, floors spotless, stock completely organized. The crew worked until 6:40, but Rick made it clear that only scheduled hours could be claimed. Overtime requires prior written approval, he announced. Since I didn't approve OT, make sure your punches show 6 a.m. Anyone who punches actual time will be written up for unauthorized overtime. Company policy. More wage theft. 40 minutes per person, stolen with procedural justification that made it look legitimate in the records. Daniel documented everything, his evidence file growing. In the parking lot, as dawn painted the sky in shades of exhausted gray, Daniel sat in his car and reviewed the footage he'd captured. The wage theft was clear. The hostile work environment was documented. The deliberate scheduling manipulation that kept employees under benefit thresholds was evident in conversations he'd recorded. But he needed more. He needed Rick to reveal the full scope of his exploitation. He needed evidence that would be irrefutable, that would make reform mandatory rather than optional. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel embedded himself completely in the overnight crew's world. He worked every shift, endured every humiliation, documented every violation. He watched Rick Halden exercise petty tyranny over people who had no choice but to accept it. He saw schedules changed without notice, forcing workers to choose between their jobs and other obligations. He witnessed coercion, threats barely veiled as management guidance, and systematic intimidation. And he watched Elena deteriorate. Each night, she looked more exhausted, more desperate, more defeated. The weight of her daughter's failing health, combined with the impossible grind of 3 jobs, was visibly crushing her. Daniel wanted to intervene, to write that check and solve the immediate crisis, but he forced himself to wait. Partial solutions weren't enough. He needed to destroy the entire toxic system. On the 15th night, Rick pulled Elena into the office. Daniel positioned himself near the door, his phone recording, capturing every word of what followed. Elena, we need to talk about your performance, Rick began, his voice carrying false concern. I've been reviewing your metrics, and there are issues. What issues, Mr. Halden? Elena's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I've met every requirement, completed every task. It's not about tasks. It's about attitude, commitment, the intangibles that make someone valuable to the team. Rick leaned back in his chair. I've noticed you seem distracted, upset. Personal problems affecting your work. My daughter is sick, Elena said quietly, but it hasn't affected my performance. I've never missed a shift, never failed an inspection. Maybe not technically, but there's a certain energy I expect from my team, a positivity. And lately, you've been bringing negativity into the workplace. Daniel's grip tightened on his phone. This was it. The manufactured justification for what came next. I'm sorry if I've seemed negative, Elena said, desperation bleeding through. I'll do better. Please, Mr. Halden, I need these hours. I need this job. I understand, and that's why I'm giving you an opportunity. Rick's smile was predatory. There's a way you could demonstrate your commitment to the team, Show me you're really invested in being here. The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Elena went very still. What are you suggesting? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I think you know, Rick replied smoothly. You're a smart woman, and I'm a reasonable manager. We could help each other out. I could find extra hours for you, maybe even recommend you for full-time status, and you could show appropriate appreciation. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10, 15. Daniel could hear his own heart pounding, his rage building to levels that threatened his carefully maintained cover. When Elena spoke, her voice was dead. And if I refuse, then I can't guarantee your current schedule will continue. Rick's tone remained conversational, businesslike, as if he were discussing inventory rather than extortion. In fact, I'm seeing some significant performance concerns that might require schedule reduction, maybe down to 15 hours, maybe less. Purely professional evaluation, you understand. That would destroy me, Elena whispered. My daughter needs... Your daughter's problems aren't my responsibility. Your job performance is. Rick stood, moving around the desk to stand too close to Elena. So think carefully about your choices. You have until tomorrow night to decide how valuable this job really is to you. He opened the door, dismissing her. Elena fled without another word, her face ashen. Daniel continued working, his mind racing through scenarios. He had the recording, clear evidence of sexual harassment and economic coercion. He could reveal himself right now, fire Rick immediately, bring down the full weight of corporate authority. But there were other victims, other Rick Haldens across his empire. If he acted now on incomplete evidence, the systemic problems would persist. Managers would learn to be more careful, to hide their exploitation better, but the fundamental culture would remain. He needed one more piece, evidence of Rick's broader operation, proof that this wasn't isolated harassment, but systematic abuse. And he was beginning to understand how to get it. The next morning, Daniel made a phone call to Elena from an untraceable number. When she answered, her voice was thick with exhaustion and tears. Elena, it's Daniel from the store. Don't hang up. I need you to trust me for about 30 seconds. How did you get this number? Panic edged her voice. That doesn't matter. What matters is that I can help you, but I need you to do exactly what I tell you, and I need you not to ask questions. Can you do that? Silence. Then, cautiously, what do you want? Tonight, when Rick makes his proposition to you again, I need you to accept it. What? The word was sharp with betrayal. You want me to... I want you to agree, and then I want you to tell him you'll meet him, but that you need him to put the arrangement in writing. Tell him you need confirmation of the hours increase, the promotion, the benefits. Make it sound like you're protecting yourself from being cheated, like you don't fully trust him, but you're willing to negotiate. That's insane. He will, Daniel interrupted, because men like Rick think they're untouchable. They think their power makes them immune to consequences. He'll write it down because documenting his control feeds his ego, and when he does, I'll make sure that document destroys his career and fixes this entire broken system. Trust me, Elena. I know what I'm doing. Another long silence. Who are you? Elena asked finally. You're not just some random stock guy. I've watched you work. You move wrong, talk wrong, think wrong. You're something else. I'm someone who's going to make sure your daughter gets her surgery and Rick Halden never hurts anyone again. That's all you need to know right now. Will you trust me? The silence stretched so long Daniel thought she might hang up. Then, barely audible, if this goes wrong, it won't. But Elena, I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens tonight, no matter how scared you get, remember that I'm there. Remember that this ends tomorrow. Can you do that? I don't have much choice, Elena said bitterly. My daughter has 6 weeks. What's one more night of humiliation if there's even a chance it helps her? It will help her, I promise you. Daniel ended the call, his hands shaking with rage and determination. Tonight, Rick Halden would overreach. Tonight, the evidence would become irrefutable, and tomorrow, the reckoning would begin. That night felt different from the moment Daniel walked through the employee entrance. The air itself seemed charged with the electricity of impending confrontation, though no one else appeared to notice. The overnight crew clocked in with their usual exhausted resignation, Elena among them, her face a carefully constructed mask that revealed nothing of the terror Daniel knew she carried. Their eyes met briefly across the break room. She gave the smallest nod. Acknowledgement, agreement, or perhaps simply acceptance of fate. Daniel couldn't tell which, but it didn't matter. The machinery of justice was already in motion, grinding forward with the inevitability he'd spent 2 decades perfecting in boardrooms and negotiations. Tonight, that machinery would chew up Rick Halden and spit out consequences. The shift began normally enough. Rick conducted his opening walkthrough with typical swagger, distributing assignments and criticism in equal measure. He barely glanced at Elena, but Daniel caught the predatory satisfaction in that calculated disregard. Rick was making her wait, letting the anxiety build, exercising control through deliberate psychological torture. It was a technique Daniel recognized from hostile takeovers and corporate warfare. Break your opponent's nerve before the actual confrontation, and they'll capitulate before negotiations even begin. But Elena held herself together, moving through her cleaning route with mechanical precision. Daniel worked his assigned sections while positioning himself strategically, ensuring he could monitor the office area without appearing to do so. He'd spent the day preparing, securing everything he needed for what came next. His phone was fully charged, set to record with multiple backup options. He'd arranged for encrypted cloud storage to receive the files in real time, ensuring that even if something went catastrophically wrong, the evidence would survive. At 11:30 p.m., Rick called Elena into the office. Daniel watched her walk that corridor like a prisoner approaching execution, each step requiring visible effort. The door closed behind them, and Daniel moved quickly to his pre-selected position, a supply closet with a shared ventilation duct that carried sound directly from Rick's office. It wasn't perfect acoustics, but combined with his phone's recording capability, it would capture everything. Rick's voice came through first, oily with false warmth. "Elena, come in. Sit down. I wanted to follow up on our conversation from yesterday." "Yes, Mr. Halden." Elena's voice was barely audible, tight with controlled fear. "Have you thought about what we discussed? About demonstrating your commitment to this team?" A pause. Daniel could imagine Elena gathering her courage, forcing herself to speak words that revolted her. "I've thought about it." "And?" Rick's tone sharpened with anticipation. "I want to make sure I understand the arrangement." Elena's voice grew slightly stronger, following the script Daniel had given her. "You said you could increase my hours, possibly recommend me for full-time status. I need to know that's guaranteed." Rick laughed, a sound that made Daniel's fists clench. "Elena, you need to understand how these things work. This isn't a formal contract. This is about mutual benefit, about showing that you're a team player who understands how to work within the system." "But I need the hours, Mr. Halden. My daughter's surgery—" "I know about your daughter," Rick interrupted. "That's why I'm offering you this opportunity. But you need to show good faith first. You need to prove you're serious." "I am serious," Elena said, and Daniel heard the desperation bleeding through despite her attempt at control. "But I've been in situations before where promises were made and not kept. I need something in writing, just a note confirming the hour increase and the full-time recommendation. For my own protection." The silence stretched long enough that Daniel worried Rick would refuse, that his instinct for self-preservation would override his arrogance. But then Rick spoke again, his voice thick with the condescension of someone who believed he held all the power. "You want proof that I'm good for my word? Fine. I'll write you a note. But understand something, Elena. This is a one-time offer. You either accept the arrangement tonight or your hours get cut tomorrow. Those are your options. There's no negotiation, no middle ground. You're either with me or against me, and I promise you don't want to be against me." Daniel heard movement. Rick presumably getting paper and pen, his heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for the damning evidence to be created. This was it, the moment when Rick's arrogance would become his destruction. "Here," Rick said after a moment. "This confirms that in exchange for your demonstrated commitment to team values and personal cooperation with management, I will increase your schedule to 35 hours per week and recommend you for full-time status with benefits effective next quarter. Signed and dated. Satisfied?" "What does personal cooperation mean exactly?" Elena asked, her voice shaking. "I need it to be clear." "It means what we both know it means," Rick replied impatiently. It means you show appropriate appreciation for my help. It means you make yourself available when I need you to be available. It means you understand that advancement in this company requires more than just punching a clock. Do I need to spell it out more explicitly? No, Elena whispered. I understand. Good. Now, we can start tonight. My shift ends at midnight, and I can meet you— I need one more night, Elena interrupted quickly. My daughter's home alone, and I need to arrange care for her first, tomorrow night. I promise. Rick's irritation crackled through the vent. You're stalling. I'm not, I swear. I just need to make sure Lucia is safe. One more night, Mr. Halden, please. Another pause. Then, fine, tomorrow night. But Elena, if you're playing games with me, if you're trying to back out of this arrangement, I will destroy you. I'll make sure you never work retail again anywhere in this region. I have connections, and I will burn you. Understand? I understand, Elena said, her voice barely audible. Now, get back to work. And don't mention this conversation to anyone. What happens between us is private. If I hear you've been talking, the deal is off and you're fired. Clear? Clear. Daniel heard the office door open, followed by Elena's footsteps retreating rapidly. He waited in the supply closet, his mind racing. He had the conversation recorded, but he needed that written document. That physical evidence would make everything irrefutable. Handwritten proof of coercion, explicit acknowledgement of quid pro quo harassment, signed and dated by Rick himself. He needed to get that paper before Rick destroyed it, or before Elena's nerve broke completely. Emerging from the supply closet, Daniel returned to his assigned work area, maintaining the appearance of normal routine. But his mind was calculating angles, planning moves like the chess game this had become. Rick would keep that document in his office, probably in his desk. He'd want it accessible but not visible to casual observation. The office was locked when Rick wasn't present, but Daniel had noted the security protocols during his weeks of observation. The cameras had blind spots. The door locks were basic. And at 3 a.m. during the scheduled break period when Rick typically left the store to get coffee from the 24-hour convenience store down the street, there would be a window. At 2:45 a.m., Daniel positioned himself near the break room, watching Rick's patterns. Sure enough, at exactly 3:00, Rick grabbed his keys and headed for the exit, calling over his shoulder to Sandra, the senior night supervisor. I'm getting coffee. Back in 15. Keep everyone working. The moment the exterior door closed behind Rick, Daniel moved. He'd already identified the office camera's blind spot, a narrow angle near the door where the mounting position created a gap in coverage. He approached from that angle, using a technique he'd learned from corporate security consultants during executive protection training. The lock was simple, defeated in under 30 seconds with tools he'd acquired specifically for this purpose. Inside, he moved quickly, silently, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Rick's desk was cluttered with schedules, incident reports, inventory logs. Daniel rifled through papers with practiced efficiency, knowing exactly what he was looking for. And there it was. In a folder labeled Personnel Issues, Rick's handwritten note to Elena, every damning word preserved in blue ink. Daniel photographed it from multiple angles with his phone, ensuring the image quality was perfect, that every word was legible, that the date and Rick's signature were clear. Then he carefully replaced it exactly as he'd found it, making sure nothing appeared disturbed. He was back at his workstation within 4 minutes, his heart rate elevated but his expression calm. When Rick returned 8 minutes later, coffee in hand and no suspicion in his demeanor, Daniel was restocking shelves with the same methodical efficiency he'd displayed all night. But now he had everything: the recorded conversation, the written document, the pattern of wage theft, the systematic scheduling manipulation, 2 weeks of documented violations. He had built a case that was absolutely irrefutable, evidence that would withstand any legal challenge or corporate whitewashing. The rest of the shift passed with excruciating slowness. Daniel worked mechanically, his mind already 3 steps ahead, planning the morning's moves. At 6 a.m., when the crew clocked out, he watched Elena walk to her car with the defeated posture of someone who'd surrendered to circumstances beyond her control. She didn't know yet that surrender wouldn't be necessary, that the power dynamic she believed was absolute was about to invert completely. Daniel drove to a 24-hour copy center, where he printed multiple copies of all his documentation and secured them in separate locations. He uploaded everything to encrypted cloud storage with access granted to his personal attorney. He prepared a comprehensive report outlining every violation, every instance of exploitation, every systemic failure he'd witnessed. By 8 a.m., he had built a prosecutorial case that could have sent Rick to prison and triggered regulatory investigations into his entire company. But Daniel wanted more than Rick's destruction. He wanted transformation. At 9 a.m., he called Marcus Chen, his CFO, from a secure line. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the anxiety of someone whose boss had been unreachable for 2 weeks with only vague excuses. "Daniel? Where have you been? The board is demanding answers, and I've been covering for—" "Marcus, listen carefully," Daniel interrupted. "I need you to arrange an emergency meeting at the Riverside store. Today, 2 p.m. Bring legal, bring HR, bring security. Don't inform anyone at the store that we're coming. Tell the team it's a routine corporate inspection, nothing more." "What's going on?" "I'll explain when you arrive. Just make sure everyone understands this is priority alpha. Drop everything else." "Daniel, you're scaring me. If this is about the Riverside numbers, I can—" "It's not about the numbers," Daniel said quietly. "It's about what's behind the numbers. Just trust me and arrange the meeting." He spent the rest of the morning preparing for the confrontation. He reviewed all his documentation one final time, organized the evidence into a presentation that would be devastating in its clarity. He rehearsed what he would say, how he would reveal himself, how he would transform this moment of reckoning into a catalyst for systemic change. At 1 p.m., he returned to the Riverside store, still dressed as Daniel Morse, the struggling stock worker. The day shift was in full operation, customers browsing aisles while employees restocked and assisted. Rick was in the office, visible through the window, reviewing schedules with the same proprietary authority he'd wielded for years. At 2 p.m. precisely, 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot. Marcus emerged from the first vehicle, followed by the company's general counsel, the chief human resources officer, the head of corporate security, and 3 attorneys from the firm that handled Daniel's most sensitive legal matters. They entered the store with the purposeful stride of people on official business, and Daniel watched Rick's face pale as he registered the corporate invasion. Sandra hurried to intercept them. "Can I help you? We weren't expecting—" "We're here to see Rick Halden," Marcus announced. "Corporate inspection. Where's his office?" "I'll get him," Sandra said, confusion and worry evident in her voice. She disappeared toward the back, and moments later Rick emerged, his expression oscillating between confusion and barely concealed panic. "Mr. Chen," Rick said, forcing professional warmth into his voice. "This is unexpected. If I'd known you were visiting, I could have prepared—" "This isn't a prepared visit," Marcus replied coldly. "We need your office. Now." Rick led them to the back. His swagger diminished, and Daniel followed at a distance, just another anonymous employee curious about the corporate drama. He watched them file into Rick's office, the small space crowded with executives and lawyers, and then he moved to his position near the door. Inside, Marcus was speaking. "Mr. Halden, we've received serious allegations regarding your management practices. Before we proceed, I need to inform you that this conversation is being recorded and that you have the right to have a representative present." "Allegations?" Rick's voice carried forced confusion. "I don't understand. My numbers are excellent. This store is one of the top performers in the—" "We're not here about your numbers," the general counsel interrupted. "We're here about how you achieved those numbers. Specifically, we have evidence of systematic wage theft, illegal scheduling manipulation to deny benefits, hostile work environment violations, and sexual harassment, including quid pro quo coercion." The silence in that office was absolute. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. That's insane," Rick stammered. "Who's making these accusations? Because I can tell you right now, it's probably some disgruntled employee with performance issues trying to create problems. I run a tight ship here, but I've never done anything illegal." "The source of the allegations is irrelevant at this stage," Marcus replied. "What's relevant is the evidence, and we have extensive documentation." "What evidence? You can't just come in here and—" The general counsel opened a tablet and began reading. "We have recordings of you instructing employees to falsify time cards. We have documentation of mandatory unpaid meetings. We have evidence of you deliberately scheduling employees under the benefits threshold. We have recordings of threatening behavior and economic coercion, and we have this." She held up a printed copy of Rick's handwritten note to Elena. Rick's face went from pale to ashen. "Where did you get that? That's private property. You can't—" "We can, and we have," Marcus said coldly. "Rick Halden, as of this moment, you are suspended without pay pending a full investigation. You need to surrender your keys, your access badge, and any company property. Corporate security will escort you from the premises." "You can't fire me for—" "We're not firing you yet," the general counsel clarified. "We're suspending you while we determine the full extent of your violations. However, I should inform you that we'll be referring this matter to law enforcement for potential criminal charges, and we'll be cooperating fully with any investigation. You may want to contact an attorney." Rick's composure shattered. "This is because of Elena, isn't it? That bitch went to corporate, and you believe her over me? I'm the one who made this store profitable. I'm the one whose numbers are perfect, and you're going to destroy my career over some janitor who can't handle the requirements of professional employment?" The words hung in the air like poison, confirming everything the evidence had already proven. Rick's instinct, when cornered, was to attack his victim, to cast himself as the aggrieved party persecuted for efficiency. "Your numbers are perfect because you were stealing from your employees," Marcus said, his voice sharp with disgust. "Your efficiency came from exploitation, and this company will not tolerate that behavior regardless of profitability." This was the moment. Daniel stepped forward from his position outside the office door, entering the crowded space with the calm authority he'd been suppressing for 2 weeks. Every eye turned to him. Marcus's widening with shock and recognition, the attorneys with confusion, Rick's with dismissive contempt. "Who the hell are you?" Rick demanded. "Get out of here. This is a private meeting." Daniel pulled off his cap, straightened his posture, and let his carefully maintained disguise fall away. He met Marcus's eyes first, giving the smallest nod of acknowledgement, then turned his full attention to Rick. "My name is Daniel Cross," he said quietly. "I own this company." The silence that followed was profound. Rick's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally horror as comprehension dawned. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, understanding flooding through him. The attorneys simply stared, trying to process the impossibility of what they were witnessing. "For the past 2 weeks," Daniel continued, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel that made everyone in the room freeze, "I've worked overnight stock in this store. I've experienced firsthand the toxic culture you created. I've witnessed the wage theft, the coercion, the systematic exploitation. I've recorded it, documented it, and built a case that will ensure you never harm another employee again." Rick's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His brain, which had navigated years of petty tyranny, couldn't process the inversion happening before him. The powerless worker he'd barely noticed was the billionaire CEO who controlled his entire existence. "You can't," Rick finally managed. "That's entrapment, or fraud, or—" "It's neither," the general counsel said, her voice carrying grim satisfaction. "An owner conducting undercover investigation of his own company is entirely legal. Everything Mr. Cross observed and recorded is admissible as evidence." Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, pulling up the recording from the previous night. He played it on speaker, letting Rick's voice fill the office. "This confirms that in exchange for your demonstrated commitment to team values and personal cooperation with management, I will increase your schedule to 35 hours per week." He let it play for 30 seconds, long enough to establish the quid pro quo, then stopped it. "I have the entire conversation. I have your written document. And I have 2 weeks of evidence showing systematic violations across this store. The question now, Mr. Halden, isn't whether you're guilty. The question is how much damage your behavior has done and how many other people across my company are operating the same way." Rick collapsed into his chair, the full weight of his situation crushing him. "I was just doing my job," he whispered. "I was keeping costs down, maintaining efficiency. That's what corporate wanted." "Corporate wanted profitability," Marcus said sharply. "Not exploitation, not theft, not harassment. You perverted the systems we put in place and used them to hurt people." Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You know what the worst part is, Rick? You're right that the system enabled you. The algorithms I created, the efficiency metrics I championed, the cost-cutting measures I implemented, they all made it easier for people like you to exploit workers. I built a machine that was supposed to elevate everyone, and people like you turned it into a meat grinder. That's on me. But what you did with that machine, that's on you. And you're going to face every consequence that comes from it. He straightened, addressing Marcus and the legal team. I want a full audit of every store in the company. I want every manager's practices examined. I want to know how many other Rick Haldens are operating in my empire. And I want every stolen dollar returned, every denied benefit restored, every terminated employee who was targeted reviewed for wrongful dismissal. Daniel, Marcus began carefully, that's going to cost millions, possibly tens of millions. The board will approve it or find new employment, Daniel interrupted. I don't care what it costs. We're going to fix this completely, transparently, and immediately. Starting with this store. He turned to the head of HR. I want Elena Morales located immediately. I want her brought here with the assurance that she's not in trouble, that this is about helping her. And I want her daughter's medical situation assessed so we can provide whatever support is needed. Sir, the HR director said carefully, while I understand the impulse to help, we need to be careful about appearance of favoritism or special treatment. I don't care about appearances, Daniel said flatly. That woman's daughter is dying because our scheduling practices deliberately denied her health care. We're going to fix that immediately, and then we're going to fix the system that created the situation. Find her. Now. The HR director nodded and stepped outside to make calls. Rick remained slumped in his chair, his career and life disintegrating before his eyes. Corporate security arrived and began the process of escorting him from the store, taking his keys and badge, reducing him from petty tyrant to escorted visitor in a matter of minutes. As they led him past, Rick looked at Daniel with something between hatred and desperation. You don't understand what it's like on the ground, he said. The pressure to perform, to hit numbers, to keep costs down. Corporate pushes and pushes, and then acts shocked when managers do what's necessary to meet impossible standards. Those standards were never impossible, Daniel replied quietly. They only became impossible when you decided that stealing from your employees and coercing vulnerable women was easier than actual management. You had choices, Rick. You chose exploitation. Now you face the consequences. Security led Rick away, and Daniel turned to find Sandra standing in the doorway, her face pale with shock and confusion. Behind her, the entire day shift had gathered, word of the corporate invasion spreading through the store with viral speed. Everyone, Daniel said, projecting his voice to reach the assembled employees, I need you to listen carefully, because what I'm about to say affects all of you. My name is Daniel Cross. I own this company. For the past 2 weeks, I've been working here undercover, and I've discovered systematic violations of labor law, wage theft, and exploitation. That ends today, immediately. The crowd stirred, murmurs rippling through the assembled workers. Daniel saw fear, hope, confusion, and skepticism in equal measure. Over the next week, every one of you will be interviewed by corporate HR, not to punish you, but to document any violations you've experienced. Any stolen wages will be returned with interest. Any benefits you were denied will be restored retroactively. Anyone who was terminated or had hours cut in retaliation for complaints will be reviewed for reinstatement. This store is going to become a model for what retail employment should be, not what it's been. He paused, letting the words sink in. I also want to be clear about something. What happened here isn't unique. This is systematic across my company, and I take responsibility for creating the conditions that enabled it. The efficiency metrics I championed, the cost-cutting I demanded, they were corrupted into weapons against you. That's my failure as a leader, and I'm going to fix it, even if it costs me everything I've built. From the back of the crowd, a voice called out, Why should we believe you? You're the CEO. You say things will change, but they never do. Daniel met the speaker's eyes. A young woman, maybe 25, with the hardened skepticism of someone who'd learned not to trust promises from authority. You're right not to trust me automatically, he said. I haven't earned your trust yet. But watch what happens over the next few weeks. Watch the audits, watch the policy changes, watch the money that gets returned to your pockets. Judge me by my actions, not my words. And if I fail to deliver on these promises, hold me accountable, publicly, loudly. I'm not asking for blind faith. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that things can actually change. The crowd began to disperse, conversations erupting as employees processed the impossible transformation they'd just witnessed. Daniel turned to Marcus, who stood with his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "You could have just ordered an audit," Marcus said quietly. "You didn't need to work undercover for 2 weeks, risking discovery, potentially exposing the company to massive liability if something had gone wrong." "I needed to understand it," Daniel replied. "The numbers didn't show me the truth. They showed me efficiency and profit. I needed to feel the weight of that cleaning cart, hear the crying behind the bathroom door, experience the fear that comes from working under someone like Rick. Otherwise, I would have implemented half measures that looked good on paper but didn't actually fix anything. The board is going to lose their minds when they find out. Then they can join Rick in the unemployment line," Daniel said without hesitation. "I've spent 2 decades building this empire, and I'm not going to let it become a machine that crushes people. Not anymore. And if the stock price tanks, if investors revolt?" Daniel turned to face Marcus fully, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Then I'll buy them out and take the company private. I'll burn my entire fortune restructuring this place before I let it continue operating as an exploitation engine. This isn't about profitability anymore, Marcus. This is about whether I'm going to be remembered as someone who built an empire on human suffering or someone who had the courage to fix it when he discovered what it had become." The HR director returned, her expression troubled. "Sir, we've located Elena Morales. She's at her second job, a diner about 3 miles from here. But when we called to arrange her coming here, she panicked. She thinks she's being fired. She's terrified." Daniel felt his chest tighten. Of course, Elena would interpret a summons to the store as termination. Of course, her first instinct would be fear rather than hope. That was what the system had taught her. "I'll go get her myself," he said. "Which diner?" 20 minutes later, Daniel walked into a roadside diner that looked like it had been serving the same menu since 1975. The breakfast crowd had thinned, leaving mostly regulars nursing coffee. Behind the counter, he spotted Elena immediately, still in her custodial uniform, her hair pulled back, her movements efficient despite obvious exhaustion. She was pouring coffee for a customer when she looked up and saw him. Her face went white, the coffee pot shaking in her hand. Elena set the coffee pot down carefully, as if sudden movement might shatter what remained of her composure. Her manager, a heavy-set man with suspicious eyes, looked between them, sensing trouble in the way people who run marginal businesses always do. "Elena, you got a problem?" the manager asked, his tone suggesting that problems were grounds for immediate termination. "No, sir," Elena said quickly, her voice tight. "This is just someone from my other job." Daniel approached the counter slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening, aware that Elena was balancing on the knife's edge of panic. "I need to speak with you," he said quietly. "It's important. Not bad. I promise it's not bad. But we need to talk privately." "I can't leave my shift," Elena said, desperation bleeding through. "I need these hours. Please, Daniel, whatever this is about, I'll fix it. Just don't—" "Elena," Daniel interrupted gently, "you're not in trouble. I'm not here to fire you or punish you. I'm here because things have changed, and I need you to come with me to understand how much they've changed." The manager stepped forward, his bulk imposing. "Look, buddy, I don't know what kind of drama you're bringing into my establishment, but Elena's on the clock until 2. Whatever personal business you got can wait." Daniel pulled out his wallet and extracted $500 bills, placing them on the counter. "This covers her shift and any inconvenience. Elena needs to come with me right now." The manager's eyes widened at the cash, his objections evaporating in the face of unexpected profit. He snatched the bills before they could disappear. "Yeah, okay. Elena, take the rest of the day. We'll sort out the schedule later." Elena stared at the money, then at Daniel, her face cycling through confusion, fear, and something approaching hope that she didn't dare fully embrace. "I don't understand what's happening," she whispered. "I know. Come with me, and I'll explain everything." Daniel gestured toward the door. "Please, Elena, trust me one more time." She untied her apron with shaking hands, moving like someone in a dream or a nightmare, unable to distinguish which. They walked outside into the afternoon sunlight, and Daniel led her to his rental car, still the nondescript sedan he'd been using for his undercover work, not the executive vehicle that would have screamed wealth and power. Inside the car, Elena sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap. "If this is about last night," she began, her voice raw with shame and fear, "I didn't tell anyone about Rick's proposition. I kept my mouth shut like he demanded. I don't know how corporate found out, but it wasn't from me. I swear." "Elena, stop," Daniel said firmly. "You're not in trouble. Rick is. He's been suspended and will likely face criminal charges. And the reason corporate knows about his proposition is because I told them." She turned to stare at him, incomprehension written across her features. "You told them? How would you even know to contact corporate?" Daniel took a breath, knowing that what came next would shatter every assumption Elena had made about him. "Because I am corporate. My real name is Daniel Cross. I own the company. I've been working undercover at the Riverside store for the past 2 weeks to understand what was really happening there." The silence that followed stretched so long that Daniel began to worry Elena had gone into shock. Her face was blank, expressionless, as if her brain had simply refused to process information that made no sense within her understanding of reality. "You're," she finally managed, her voice barely audible. "You're the CEO, the billionaire owner?" "Yes." "And you've been working as stock crew, unloading trucks, cleaning floors?" Her voice rose with each question, disbelief giving way to something sharper. "Why? Was this some kind of game? Some twisted social experiment where rich people pretend to be poor to see how hard our lives are?" "No," Daniel said quietly. "This was me discovering that the company I built had become something monstrous. The efficiency reports told me the Riverside store was perfect. Low costs, high productivity, 0 complaints. But numbers lie, Elena. They hide the human cost. I needed to see the truth." "So you lied to me," Elena said, her voice hardening. "You listened to me cry about my daughter. You let me pour out my desperation. And the whole time you could have written a check and solved everything. You could have stopped Rick with a phone call. But instead you played dress-up and gathered evidence while my daughter got sicker, and I had to seriously consider prostituting myself to keep my job. Do you have any idea how that feels?" The anger in her voice was righteous and devastating. Daniel had anticipated gratitude, relief, perhaps even joy when Elena learned the truth. He hadn't fully considered that she might see his deception as its own form of cruelty. "You're right to be angry," he said. "I made choices that prolonged your suffering. But Elena, if I'd revealed myself immediately and just fixed your specific situation, nothing would have changed systemically. Rick would have been more careful. Other managers would have learned to hide their exploitation better. The toxic culture would have persisted. I needed comprehensive evidence to burn it all down and rebuild correctly." "That's easy for you to say from your penthouse," Elena shot back. "You weren't the one wondering if you'd have to sleep with your boss to save your child's life. You weren't the one working 70 hours across 3 jobs and still drowning. You weren't the one living the consequences of your wait-and-see approach while you built your comprehensive case." "Well, you're absolutely right," Daniel acknowledged. "I made strategic decisions that prioritized long-term systemic change over immediate individual relief. And those decisions had costs that I didn't have to pay personally. But Elena, I'm here now because I need you to understand that everything has changed. Rick is gone. The stolen wages are being returned. And your daughter's going to get her surgery." Elena's breath caught. "What?" "I've already contacted the hospital where Lucia's cardiologist practices. I've arranged full payment for her surgery, preoperative care, the procedure itself, postoperative recovery, and any follow-up treatment she needs. It's being processed as a company healthcare benefit that was wrongly denied, which is exactly what it is. The surgery can be scheduled as soon as the medical team determines she's ready." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks, her anger colliding with hope and disbelief. "You're serious? You're not lying to me again." "I'm not lying. Your daughter is going to get the care she needs, and you're going to get the support you should have had all along." Daniel pulled out his phone and showed her the email confirmation from the hospital's billing department, The balance showing zero, the surgery scheduled for the following week pending final preoperative assessments. Elena read it once, twice, 3 times, as if repetition might make it more real or reveal it as an elaborate hoax. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything," Daniel replied quietly. "You showed me the truth about my company. You revealed the cost of my efficiency metrics and optimization algorithms. You taught me that numbers don't cry, but people do. And when I finally listened, really listened, it changed everything." "But the cost," Elena protested. "The surgery alone is $85,000. And you're talking about full treatment, recovery, everything. That's more than I'll earn in 3 years." "It's a rounding error in my quarterly budget," Daniel said bluntly. "I spent more than that on a watch I've worn twice. The cost isn't the issue, Elena. Justice is the issue. You were denied healthcare benefits because my company's policies were weaponized against you. That's wage theft at a scale that transcends money. Fixing it isn't charity, it's basic restitution." Elena buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. These weren't the desperate, hopeless tears Daniel had heard through the bathroom door. These were tears of release, of impossible hope finally realized, of a mother's prayer answered against all odds. Daniel sat quietly, letting her cry, understanding that this moment needed no words or interventions. Finally, Elena looked up, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "I don't even know if thank you is adequate for saving my daughter's life, but thank you. God, thank you." "Thank me by coming back to the store with me," Daniel said. "There's more we need to discuss, and I need you to see what's happening there." Elena nodded, still dazed, and they drove back to Riverside in silence. When they pulled into the parking lot, Elena tensed at the sight of the corporate SUVs still parked near the entrance. "What's all this?" she asked nervously. "Accountability," Daniel replied. "Come on." Inside, the store had been transformed into something resembling a crisis command center. The legal team had commandeered the conference room, conducting interviews with employees. The HR director was processing paperwork at a hastily arranged desk. Marcus was coordinating audits via phone and laptop. The atmosphere hummed with purposeful activity. Elena hesitated at the entrance, her instincts screaming that spaces like this, spaces filled with lawyers and executives, were dangerous for people like her. Daniel gently touched her elbow, guiding her forward. "Mr. Cross," the HR director called out, spotting them, "I have the preliminary assessment of scheduling violations across the store. Every employee currently classified as part-time has been maintained deliberately under the benefits threshold. We're looking at 47 people denied healthcare coverage, retirement contributions, paid leave, and other benefits they should have received." "What's the total cost to make them whole?" Daniel asked. The HR director consulted her tablet. "Retroactive benefits for the past 3 years, restored wages including overtime violations, and compensatory damages for healthcare expenses incurred due to denied coverage. We're estimating between $4 and $6 million for this single location." Elena gasped audibly. $6 million? "That's what was stolen from you and your coworkers," Daniel said flatly. "That's the cost of Rick Halden's perfect efficiency numbers. That's what optimization looks like when it's used as a weapon." Marcus approached, his expression grim. "Daniel, I've initiated preliminary audits at 12 other locations based on similar performance metrics. Early indications suggest this isn't isolated. We might be looking at systematic violations across 15 to 20% of our stores." Daniel did the math instantly. If 20% of his stores had similar issues, the total cost of restitution could approach $200 million. His board would lose their minds. His stock price would crater. His reputation as a brilliant CEO would take a permanent hit, and he didn't care even slightly. "Audit all of them," he ordered. "Every single store. I want to know the full scope of this problem. And Marcus, I want you to draft policy changes that make this impossible going forward. Minimum hours guarantees for anyone who wants them. Benefits starting at 20 hours instead of 30, transparent scheduling with advance notice, real oversight of management practices. Build me a system that prioritizes people over profit margins." That's going to reduce our operational efficiency by... I don't care, Daniel interrupted. We've been measuring the wrong things. Efficiency that relies on exploitation isn't efficiency, it's theft with better branding. Build me a system that's actually sustainable, actually ethical, actually worthy of the people who work within it. Sandra approached cautiously, her earlier confusion replaced by tentative understanding. Mr. Cross, the day shift employees are asking questions. They want to know what's happening, whether their jobs are safe, whether the promises you made earlier are real. What should I tell them? Daniel turned to address her directly. Tell them that starting today, every employee at this store moves to full-time status with complete benefits if they want them. Tell them that all stolen wages from the past 3 years will be returned within 30 days. Tell them that Rick's termination is permanent and that we're implementing oversight to ensure no other manager can operate that way. And tell them that this store is going to become the template for reforming the entire company. That's going to be expensive, Sandra said carefully. It's going to be correct, Daniel replied. There's a difference. He turned back to Elena, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes. Elena, I need to show you something. Come with me. He led her to Rick's former office, where the legal team had been conducting interviews. The space had been cleared temporarily, and Daniel gestured for Elena to sit in the chair behind the desk. Rick's chair, the seat of power that had ruled her life with arbitrary cruelty. How does it feel? Daniel asked. Elena sat tentatively, her hands resting on the desk as if she expected it to burn her. Strange. Wrong. Like I'm trespassing. You're not trespassing. You're reclaiming space that should never have been weaponized against you. Daniel sat across from her, his posture open and earnest. Elena, I want to offer you a position, not as custodial staff, but as assistant store manager. Elena laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. You're joking. I have no management experience, no college degree, no qualifications for... You have 3 years of intimate knowledge of how this store operates, Daniel interrupted. You know every system, every process, every corner of this building. You know what it's like to work under impossible conditions, which means you'll never impose those conditions on others. And you've survived circumstances that would have broken most people, which tells me you have strength and resilience that no management degree can teach. I need someone like you helping to rebuild this place correctly. I don't know anything about managing people, Elena protested. You'll learn. I'll send you to training, provide mentorship, give you the resources you need. But Elena, right now I don't need someone who knows management theory. I need someone who knows what it feels like to be powerless and will fight to ensure no one else feels that way. Will you do it? Elena stared at him, her expression oscillating between hope and terror. What about my daughter? The surgery? The recovery? I'll need time off, flexibility. I can't commit to a demanding position when Lucia needs me. Your schedule will accommodate whatever Lucia needs, Daniel assured her. Medical leave, reduced hours during recovery, whatever it takes. Your daughter's health is the priority. The job will be here when you're ready. And if I fail? Elena asked quietly. If I'm terrible at this, if I can't handle the responsibility, then we'll find a different position that suits you better, and you'll still have full benefits and job security. But Elena, I don't think you'll fail. I think you're exactly the kind of leader this company needs. Tears filled Elena's eyes again. She seemed to have an inexhaustible supply today. I don't know what to say. Yesterday I was considering prostitution to keep my job, and today you're offering me a management position and saving my daughter's life. It doesn't feel real. It's real, Daniel said firmly. And it's not charity or pity. It's recognition of your value and restitution for what was stolen from you. You earned this through years of impossible labor under brutal conditions. This is your right, not my gift. Elena took a shaky breath, squaring her shoulders in a gesture that reminded Daniel of someone preparing for battle. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll do it. I'll try. For Lucia. For myself, for everyone else who's been crushed by this system. That's all I ask, Daniel replied. Now, let's get you to the hospital. I want Lucia evaluated by the surgical team today, so we can move forward immediately. The drive to the hospital felt surreal to Elena, like moving through a dream where reality's rules had been suspended. Daniel drove while she sat in silence, occasionally touching her phone to confirm that the hospital emails were real, that this wasn't an elaborate hallucination brought on by exhaustion and desperation. At the hospital, they were met by Dr. Patricia Chen, the pediatric cardiologist who'd been treating Lucia. Dr. Chen was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the calm authority of someone who'd spent decades delivering life and death news. "Miss Morale? Doctor?" Chen said, taking Elena's hands. "I received the authorization for Lucia's surgery this morning. I've already reviewed her most recent scans, and I want to operate as soon as possible, ideally within the next week. Her condition has deteriorated since our last appointment, and we're approaching the point where repair becomes significantly more complicated." "Next week?" Elena's voice cracked. "That soon?" "We've been waiting for financial clearance, but medically, immediate intervention has been necessary for months. Now that we have authorization, I don't want to delay. Every week we wait increases her risk." "Can I see her?" Elena asked. I need to tell her everything's going to be okay." Dr. Chen smiled gently. "She's in room 412. Take all the time you need." Elena hurried toward the elevators, leaving Daniel with the cardiologist. Dr. Chen turned to him with professional curiosity. "Mr. Cross, I understand you're covering the full cost of Lucia's treatment. That's extraordinarily generous. May I ask what prompted this?" "Guilt, mostly," Daniel replied honestly. "My company's policies denied Elena the healthcare coverage that would have made this surgery accessible months ago. I'm not being generous. I'm fixing a wrong that I'm partially responsible for creating." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "I see these cases constantly. Parents working multiple jobs, still unable to afford necessary care for their children. The system is broken at a fundamental level. One generous benefactor doesn't solve the structural problems." "I know," Daniel said, "but I'm working on that too, starting with my own company." Upstairs, Elena found Lucia in her hospital room, a small girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's smile, currently absorbed in a coloring book. The heart monitor beside her bed beeped steadily, tracking rhythms that were slowly failing. "Mama!" Lucia looked up, surprised and delighted. "You're here during the day. Did something happen?" Elena sat on the edge of the bed, pulling her daughter into a careful embrace. "Something happened," she whispered into Lucia's hair. "Something wonderful. Baby, you're going to have your surgery next week. Dr. Chen is going to fix your heart, and you're going to get better." Lucia pulled back to look at her mother's face, searching for truth in her expression. "Really? The insurance company said yes?" "Better than that. Someone helped us. Someone made sure you'll get exactly the care you need." "Who?" Lucia asked, her voice filled with the simple faith of childhood that help could arrive from unexpected sources. "An angel," Elena said, not entirely joking. "A very strange, very complicated angel who disguised himself as a warehouse worker to learn how to save people." Lucia didn't fully understand, but she didn't need to. She understood that her mother was crying happy tears for the first time in months. She understood that the fear that had lived in her chest alongside her damaged heart was finally lifting. She understood that somehow, impossibly, things were going to be okay. Downstairs, Daniel received a call from Marcus. "We have a problem," Marcus said without preamble. "Word about what you did is spreading through the company. Employees at other locations are calling, asking if the same investigation is happening at their stores. Some managers are panicking, and the board just requested an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning." "Let them panic," Daniel replied. "Schedule the board meeting. I'll address them directly. And Marcus, make sure communications goes out to all employees tonight. We're conducting comprehensive audits across the entire company. All wages will be reviewed. All stolen hours will be returned, and anyone who's experienced violations can report them without fear of retaliation. Make it clear this isn't limited to one store." "Daniel, the potential liability could be massive. We could be talking about class action lawsuits, regulatory investigations, criminal charges against multiple managers. The legal team is advising extreme caution about making blanket admissions of wrongdoing." "The legal team can advise whatever they want," Daniel said coldly. "We did wrong. We're admitting it and fixing it." "I don't care about liability management. I care about justice. Send the communications." You're going to lose millions, Marcus warned. Possibly hundreds of millions. Your net worth could take a significant hit. Marcus, listen to me very carefully, Daniel said, his voice quiet but absolute. I could lose half my fortune and still be a billionaire. These employees lost their health care, their dignity, their ability to save dying children. The math isn't even close. Send the communications, order the audits, and prepare for the board meeting. We're doing this the right way, consequences be damned. He ended the call and turned to find Elena standing in the hospital corridor, having heard at least part of the conversation. You're really going to lose millions over this? She asked. I'm really going to spend millions on this, Daniel corrected. There's a difference. And honestly, Elena, it's not even a sacrifice. I'm spending money I'll never miss to restore dignity to people who had it stolen. That's not loss. That's basic decency finally catching up to corporate practice. Elena shook her head slowly. I don't understand you. Most rich people would have written one check to help Lucia and called it a day. They'd take the good publicity and move on. But you're tearing apart your entire company, risking your reputation, spending a fortune you don't have to spend. Why? Daniel thought about the question, about the real answer beneath the corporate justifications and strategic explanations. Because I heard you crying, he said finally. Because I stood outside that bathroom door and listened to another human being break under the weight of a system I created. And I realized that all the money I've made, all the success I've achieved, all the empire I've built, none of it matters if it was constructed on the suffering of people like you. I can't unhear that crying, Elena. So I'm doing the only thing that might let me live with myself. I'm fixing what I broke. Elena stepped forward and embraced him, a quick, fierce hug that conveyed gratitude beyond words. Thank you, she whispered. Not just for Lucia, for all of it, for seeing us, for caring enough to actually do something. Daniel returned the embrace awkwardly, unused to physical displays of emotion in professional contexts. Thank you for showing me the truth, he replied, even though it cost you dearly to do so. They stood in that hospital corridor for a moment, two people from completely different worlds connected by the strange alchemy of crisis and compassion. Then Elena stepped back, wiping her eyes. I should get back to Lucia, she said. We have a lot to talk about. But Mr. Cross, Daniel, he corrected. Daniel, Elena said, testing the informality. When this is all over, when Lucia's recovered and I start this new job, I'm going to hold you accountable for every promise you made. Not just to me, but to everyone working in your stores. You understand that? I'm counting on it, Daniel replied. I need people who won't let me forget what I learned these past 2 weeks. People who will push back when efficiency starts to matter more than humanity. Think you can handle that? Elena smiled. The first genuine smile Daniel had seen from her. I just survived 3 years under Rick Halden while fighting to save my daughter. I think I can handle keeping one billionaire honest. Then we have a deal, Daniel said, extending his hand. Elena shook it firmly, and in that handshake, something shifted. Not just for them personally, but for the entire machinery of the empire Daniel had built. This was the moment when extraction began transforming into reciprocity, when profit stopped being the only measure of success, when the invisible people finally became visible. It was the beginning of something new, built on the ruins of what had been broken. And standing in that hospital corridor, shaking hands with a woman whose life his systems had nearly destroyed, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 decades of corporate dominance. He felt hope that the machine could be rebuilt. Not just repaired or reformed, but fundamentally reconstructed into something that elevated everyone it touched instead of grinding them down. It wouldn't be easy. The board would fight him. Investors would revolt. Competitors would exploit any efficiency losses. The business press would question his judgment. His fortune would take hits he couldn't fully predict. But none of that mattered compared to the sound of a mother's tears being replaced by a mother's laughter. None of it outweighed the knowledge that Lucia would get her surgery, that Elena would become a manager, that 47 employees at one store would receive justice, and that thousands more across his empire would finally be seen as humans rather than resources to be optimized. The reckoning had begun, and Daniel Cross, billionaire CEO who'd spent 20 years conquering markets and crushing competition, was ready to spend whatever remained of his career ensuring that victory meant something more than numbers on a balance sheet. The emergency board meeting convened at 8 the following morning in the executive conference room, 70 floors above Manhattan. Daniel arrived early, deliberately choosing the same worn jeans and faded jacket he'd worn during his undercover work rather than the tailored suits the board expected. The message was intentional. He wasn't the same CEO who'd left this building 2 weeks ago. The 12 board members filed in with expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed hostility. Margaret Whitmore, the board chair and a veteran of 3 decades in retail, took her seat with the rigid posture of someone preparing for confrontation. "Daniel," she began without preamble, "we've received extremely disturbing reports about your activities over the past 2 weeks. Working undercover in one of our stores, summarily firing a manager without due process, making promises about massive compensation payments, authorizing medical expenses for individual employees. What exactly is going on?" Daniel remained standing rather than taking his usual seat at the head of the table. "What's going on is that I discovered our company has been systematically exploiting its workforce. Wage theft, benefits denial, sexual harassment, economic coercion, all hiding behind efficiency metrics that made everything look profitable and legal." "Those are serious allegations," said Robert Chen, the board's finance expert. "Do you have proof, or are we making multi-million-dollar decisions based on anecdotal observations from a 2-week infiltration?" Daniel opened his laptop and projected the evidence onto the conference room screens. The recordings played, Rick's voice demanding Elena falsify time cards, his explicit quid pro quo proposition, his threats and coercion. The photograph showed the handwritten document offering hours in exchange for personal cooperation. The spreadsheets documented systematic scheduling manipulation across 47 employees at a single location. The room fell silent as the evidence accumulated. When Daniel finally paused the presentation, Margaret's face had gone pale. "How widespread is this?" she asked quietly. "Preliminary audits suggest 15 to 20% of our stores have similar patterns," Marcus reported from his position near the door. "We're looking at potential restitution costs approaching $200 million, not including legal fees, regulatory fines, or reputational damage." $200 million, Robert repeated, his voice hollow. "That's nearly 40% of our annual profit. Our stock price will collapse. Shareholders will revolt. We could face derivative lawsuits from investors claiming mismanagement. We face all of that because we created systems that enabled exploitation," Daniel replied flatly. "The stock price is irrelevant compared to the human cost of what we've done." "The stock price is never irrelevant," Margaret countered sharply. "We have fiduciary responsibilities to shareholders. We can't simply hemorrhage money to fix problems that are, let's be honest, industry-wide. Every major retailer operates with similar labor practices." "Then every major retailer is committing systematic theft," Daniel said, "and I'm not interested in hiding behind industry standards when those standards are fundamentally immoral." Thomas Bradford, a board member who'd made his fortune in private equity, leaned forward with the predatory focus of someone sensing opportunity in crisis. "Daniel, I appreciate your moral awakening, but let's discuss practical realities. You're proposing we voluntarily admit to massive labor violations, pay enormous restitution, and restructure our entire operation to be less efficient. That's corporate suicide. Instead, we should quietly settle the most egregious cases, implement better oversight going forward, and move on. No blanket admissions, no company-wide overhaul, just targeted damage control." "That's exactly the thinking that created this problem," Daniel replied, his voice hardening. "Treating exploitation as a PR issue rather than a moral failure, prioritizing efficiency over ethics, viewing workers as resources to be optimized rather than human beings deserving dignity." "This is business, not philosophy class," Thomas shot back. "We have obligations to shareholders, not emotional obligations to employees who are free to seek employment elsewhere if they're unsatisfied." "Free to seek employment elsewhere," Daniel's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "You mean free to move from one exploitative retailer to another? Free to choose between different flavors of the same systematic abuse? That's not freedom. That's musical chairs on a sinking ship." Margaret raised her hand, calling for order. "Gentlemen, let's stay focused. Daniel, what specifically are you proposing?" Daniel advanced the presentation to his reform plan. "First, immediate comprehensive audits of every location. Second, full restitution of all stolen wages and denied benefits for the past 3 years. Third, policy reforms including minimum hour guarantees, benefits starting at 20 hours, transparent scheduling with advance notice, and real oversight with employee representation. Fourth, management training focused on ethical leadership rather than just efficiency metrics. Fifth, whistleblower protections and independent complaint mechanisms that bypass store-level management. The cost of implementing all that would be astronomical, Robert protested. We're talking about fundamentally restructuring our entire labor model. Yes, Daniel agreed, but that's exactly what I'm proposing. A complete restructuring away from extraction and towards sustainability. And if the board votes against this plan? Margaret asked carefully. Daniel met her eyes with absolute certainty. Then I'll resign as CEO, take my 42% ownership stake, and wage a proxy battle to replace every board member who opposed reform. I'll use every dollar of my personal fortune and every media contact I've cultivated to ensure the public knows exactly what this company has been doing and exactly which board members voted to continue that exploitation. I'll make this the defining corporate governance battle of the decade. The threat landed like a bomb in the elegant conference room. Daniel rarely exercised the full weight of his majority ownership, preferring to build consensus. But the board understood that when pushed, he had the power to remake the entire company over their objections. "You're willing to destroy your own reputation over this?" Thomas asked incredulously. "You'd be known as the CEO who tanked his own company's stock price and alienated every investor in the market." "I'd rather be known for that than as the CEO who built an empire on stolen wages and dying children," Daniel replied quietly. "I've spent 2 weeks living the consequences of our policies. I've watched a mother work herself to exhaustion across 3 jobs and still not earn enough to save her daughter's life. I've experienced the fear that permeates every interaction when workers know they're one complaint away from losing everything. I can't unsee that, and I won't lead a company that perpetuates it." Margaret looked around the table, reading the expressions of her fellow board members. Some showed grudging respect, others calculation, a few outright hostility. "We need to discuss this privately," she said. "Daniel, if you'd give us the room." Of course. Daniel gathered his laptop and left, settling into his office with Marcus and the legal team. "That was quite a performance," Marcus said dryly. "Think they'll back you?" "They don't have much choice," Daniel replied. "I have majority ownership and public sentiment on my side. The only question is whether they choose to be part of the solution or casualties of the reform." Inside the conference room, the debate raged for 90 minutes. Margaret advocated for supporting Daniel's plan with modifications to reduce costs. Thomas pushed for his replacement as CEO, arguing he'd become a liability. Robert tried to find middle ground that satisfied ethical concerns while preserving profitability. The arguments grew heated, voices rising as billions of dollars and decades of business philosophy collided. Finally, Margaret called for a vote. "All in favor of supporting Daniel's reform plan, contingent on quarterly reviews and cost controls?" 8 hands rose. 4 remained down, Thomas Bradford's among them. Margaret nodded slowly. "The board approves the reform initiative. Thomas, Robert Chen, Patricia Morgan, and David Kim, I respect your dissent, but the majority has spoken. Daniel remains CEO with full authority to implement these changes." When Daniel was summoned back, Margaret delivered the verdict with the weary tone of someone who'd fought hard battles and knew harder ones lay ahead. "You have board approval. But Daniel, understand something. We're betting the company on your moral vision. If this fails, if we lose too much money or can't compete with companies that maintain traditional labor practices, we'll have to revisit everything. You have 1 year to prove this approach can work." "1 year is enough," Daniel said. "Thank you." The next 3 weeks became a whirlwind of transformation. Daniel personally visited 47 stores, conducting town halls where employees could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. He fired 11 managers whose practices mirrored Rick Halden's. He authorized $187 million in restitution payments, stolen wages returned, benefits restored, medical expenses covered. The company's stock price dropped 14% as investors processed the news, but Daniel bought additional shares at the reduced price, deepening his ownership stake. The business press coverage was brutal. Headlines screamed about the CEO who declared war on efficiency and the retail empire's costly moral awakening. CNBC ran segments questioning Daniel's competence. Investors filed complaints. Competitors gleefully promoted their own stable management as superior to Daniel's radical experiments. Daniel ignored it all. He was too busy rebuilding. At the Riverside store, the transformation was most visible. The atmosphere shifted from fear to cautious optimism as employees realized the promises were being kept. Stolen wages appeared in paychecks, benefits activated. Schedules became predictable. The overnight crew that had worked under Rick's tyranny now collaborated with new management that actually listened to their concerns. And Elena became the embodiment of the new approach. After Lucia's successful surgery, a 7-hour procedure that repaired her damaged heart with precision that left Dr. Chen optimistic about full recovery, Elena threw herself into management training with the fierce determination of someone who'd been given an impossible second chance. Daniel personally mentored her, meeting weekly to discuss leadership philosophy, operational challenges, and the constant tension between profitability and ethics. Elena brought perspectives he'd never considered, challenging assumptions he'd held for decades about what efficiency really meant. "You keep talking about metrics," she said during one session, reviewing productivity reports. "But you're still measuring the wrong things. You're tracking sales per labor hour, inventory turnover, customer transaction speed. Those aren't meaningless, but they're incomplete. Where's the metric for employee well-being, for work-life balance, for whether people can actually afford to live on what they earn?" "Those are harder to quantify," Daniel protested. "So? Hard to quantify doesn't mean impossible or unimportant. If you only measure what's easy, you perpetuate the same systems that created Rick Halden. You need to track whether employees can pay rent, afford healthcare, have time with their families. Those should matter as much as profit margins." Daniel stared at her, then slowly smiled. "You're absolutely right. Work with HR to develop new metrics, employee well-being indexes, financial stability assessments, work-life balance surveys. Make them part of every manager's performance review." "You're serious?" Elena asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Completely. You've worked both sides of this system now. You know it needs measuring better than any consultant I could hire. Build me the metrics that would have saved you when you were drowning." Elena did exactly that, creating assessment frameworks that measure dignity alongside productivity. The Riverside store became the testing ground, and within 6 weeks the data told a remarkable story. When employees felt secure, when they had predictable schedules, adequate benefits, responsive management, productivity actually increased. Turnover dropped to nearly zero. Customer satisfaction scores rose. The store that had been efficient under Rick's tyranny became genuinely successful under Elena's leadership. 8 weeks after the confrontation, Daniel returned to Riverside for an all-staff meeting. The day shift employees gathered in the break room, faces showing cautious optimism mixed with lingering skepticism. These were people who'd been promised change before, only to see cosmetic reforms dissolve into familiar exploitation. Daniel stood before them without notes or corporate presentations, just honesty earned through shared experience. "I want to start by apologizing," he said quietly. "I built this company on principles I thought were sound: efficiency, optimization, lean operations. But I was measuring the wrong things. I was optimizing for profit without considering the human cost, and that created the conditions where people like Rick Halden could thrive by exploiting vulnerabilities I was too blind or too indifferent to see." He paused, making eye contact with individuals throughout the room. "Some of you worked under Rick for years. You endured wage theft, coercion, fear, and systematic denial of basic dignity. That happened because the systems I created prioritized numbers over people. I can't undo that harm, but I can commit to ensuring it never happens again, and I can make restitution for what was stolen from you." Sandra, who'd been promoted to store manager after completing training, raised her hand. "Mr. Cross, we've seen the wage restitution and the benefit restorations. That's real and meaningful. But how do we know this isn't temporary? How do we know that when the press attention fades and the board pressure increases, you won't quietly return to the old ways?" "You hold me accountable," Daniel replied simply. Elena is implementing new feedback systems that give you direct channels to corporate oversight, bypassing store management entirely. If you see violations, you report them. If managers retaliate, they're terminated. I've also established an independent ombudsman office funded directly by me personally, not the company, ensuring there's no conflict of interest in investigating complaints. That's unprecedented in retail, Sandra said carefully. Good, it should be standard, but if we have to be unprecedented to get there, so be it. Daniel gestured to Elena, who stood near the back of the room. I also want to officially announce that Elena Morales has been promoted to assistant store manager, effective immediately. Her compensation includes full salary, comprehensive benefits, and performance bonuses tied to the new well-being metrics she's developing. She'll be working with Sandra to ensure the store becomes a model for the entire company. The room erupted in applause, genuine, spontaneous recognition of someone who'd suffered alongside them and emerged with authority to change the system. Elena's face flushed, but she stepped forward with the confidence of someone who'd earned her position through fire. I won't let you down, she said to the assembled employees. Any of you. We're going to prove that treating people with dignity isn't just morally right, it's good business. And when corporate sees our numbers, when they see that respect and profitability can coexist, they won't be able to ignore it. After the meeting, Daniel and Elena walked through the store together, observing the changes. The atmosphere was tangibly different. Employees smiled, engaged with customers genuinely, moved without the constant tension of surveillance. The numbers reflected it too. Sales were up 6% despite the increased labor costs. Customer complaints had dropped to nearly zero. The store that had been efficient under exploitation was becoming successful under dignity. "How's Lucia?" Daniel asked as they paused near the pharmacy section where he'd first heard Elena crying weeks ago. Elena's face lit up. The transformation from the exhausted, desperate woman he'd met was almost unbelievable. "She's amazing. The surgery was completely successful. Dr. Chen says her heart is healing beautifully, and she should have totally normal function within 6 months. She starts 3rd grade next week, and she's excited rather than scared for the first time in 2 years." "That's wonderful," Daniel said, genuine warmth in his voice. "She asks about you constantly," Elena continued. "She calls you her guardian angel. She wants to meet you properly, to thank you herself. Would you consider coming to dinner? Nothing fancy, just our apartment. But it would mean everything to her." Daniel felt something catch in his throat, an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I'd be honored," he managed. That evening, Daniel found himself in Elena's modest apartment, sitting at a small kitchen table with Lucia chattering excitedly about school, her recovery, her dreams of becoming a doctor so she could help other kids like her. The apartment was tiny, carefully maintained, filled with the warmth of a home rather than just a place to sleep between shifts. Lucia, her dark hair in braids and her eyes bright with health, regarded Daniel with the solemn intensity of childhood. "Mama says you saved my life," she said directly. "Is that true?" "Your mama saved your life," Daniel replied. "She worked harder than anyone I've ever met to give you every chance. I just helped remove some obstacles." "Mama says you're rich. Like really, really rich. Is that true?" "Lucia," Elena interjected, embarrassed. "It's okay," Daniel said, smiling. "Yes, I have a lot of money." "Then why did you pretend to be poor?" Lucia asked with the blunt curiosity of 9-year-olds. "Wasn't that lying?" Daniel considered the question seriously, giving Lucia the respect of an honest answer. "I needed to understand what life was like for people who worked for my company. Sometimes, when you have a lot of money and power, you stop seeing the truth because everyone treats you differently. I pretended to be someone with no power so I could see what was really happening." "And what did you see?" Lucia pressed. "I saw that my company was hurting people like your mama, and I saw that I had the power to fix it if I was brave enough to admit I'd been wrong about how things should work." Lucia nodded slowly, processing this. "Mama says being brave means doing what's right even when it's scary. Was it scary to tell everyone your company was bad?" "Terrifying," Daniel admitted. "Some people got very angry with me. I lost a lot of money. People said mean things about me in newspapers and on TV. But you know what? It was still easier for me than it was for your mama, who had to be brave every single day just to keep you safe." Lucia turned to Elena, her expression solemn. You're the bravest person I know, Mama. Elena pulled her daughter close, tears streaming down her face for what felt like the thousandth time in recent weeks. But these were different tears than those Daniel had heard through a bathroom door. These were tears of joy, relief, and the profound gratitude of survival against impossible odds. Over dinner, simple food but prepared with care, they talked about the future. Lucia's return to school, Elena's new management role, the changes sweeping through the company. And slowly, something shifted in Daniel's understanding of what success actually meant. I've been thinking, Elena said as they cleared dishes, about the other employees across the company, the ones who don't have a billionaire CEO personally invested in their stories. What happens to them? That's what the systemic reforms are for, Daniel replied. The new policies, the oversight mechanisms, the well-being metrics. We're trying to build a system that protects everyone, not just the people I happen to meet personally. But systems can be corrupted again, Elena pointed out. Rick corrupted your original systems. What stops the next Rick from corrupting these? Daniel set down the plate he was drying, struck by the question's depth. You're right, systems alone aren't enough. We need cultural change, and that takes time and constant vigilance. That's why I need people like you in management, people who remember what it felt like to be powerless, and will fight to prevent others from experiencing that. So the answer is memory? Elena asked. Keeping people in power who remember what it's like not to have power? Partly, but also accountability structures where workers have real power to push back. Employee representatives on operational boards, transparent reporting systems, independent oversight. Make it structurally difficult for exploitation to take root, even if people try. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and Daniel prepared to leave. At the door, Lucia hugged him tightly, her small arms surprisingly strong. Thank you for helping my mama, she whispered. And thank you for being brave. Thank you for reminding me what's worth being brave for, Daniel replied. Driving back to his penthouse that night, Daniel reflected on how completely his life had transformed in less than 3 months. He'd entered that store expecting to observe efficiency metrics. Instead, he'd discovered humanity, messy, complicated, desperately beautiful humanity that couldn't be captured in spreadsheets or optimized with algorithms. The next 6 months brought continued challenges. Some managers resisted the new policies, arguing they made operations less efficient. Daniel replaced them. Some investors divested, uncomfortable with the reduced profit margins. Daniel bought their shares. The stock price fluctuated, recovering some losses but never returning to its previous highs. Daniel considered it an acceptable cost for actual sustainability. But the success stories multiplied. The Riverside store's performance metrics caught attention internally, spurring other locations to adopt similar approaches. Employee retention improved dramatically across the company. Customer satisfaction scores climbed steadily. And slowly, the narrative began shifting from CEO's costly moral experiment to innovative leadership model shows promising results. Other companies started inquiring about Daniel's approach, drawn by the paradox that treating employees well actually improved business outcomes. Daniel began speaking publicly about the experience, not as a corporate success story, but as a cautionary tale about how easily good intentions could be corrupted into exploitation if leaders stopped listening to the people who kept their empires functioning. 1 year after that night in the bathroom, Daniel returned to Riverside for an anniversary event. The store had been transformed, literally, with renovations funded by reallocating some of the money previously spent on surveillance systems and efficiency consultants. But the real transformation was atmospheric. Employees moved with confidence rather than fear. Management collaborated rather than commanded. The space felt alive in ways that metrics couldn't capture. Elena, now the official store manager after Sandra's promotion to regional supervisor, greeted him with professional warmth. She'd grown into the role beautifully, her natural empathy channeled into leadership that inspired rather than intimidated. The team wanted to do something special, she told Daniel, leading him to the break room. We know you don't like attention, but this matters to us. Inside, 47 employees, the exact number who'd been systematically denied benefits under Rick's regime, had assembled. They'd created a display showing before and after metrics, not just the corporate numbers, but personal stories. Wage increases, Healthcare accessed, education pursued, children thriving, lives rebuilt. One by one, employees stood to share how the reforms had changed their circumstances. Marcus, the young overnight worker, was now enrolled in community college, pursuing a degree in business management. Betty had finally been able to afford her diabetes medication consistently and avoid hospitalization. Sandra's daughter had received mental health treatment that was previously unaffordable. The stories cascaded, each one a small miracle multiplied across thousands of employees company-wide. When they finished, Elena presented Daniel with a framed photograph, the day shift and night shift employees together, smiling genuinely, holding a banner that read, "Dignity Works." It was corny and sincere in equal measure, exactly the kind of thing Daniel would normally dismiss as sentimental. He clutched it like a lifeline, his carefully maintained executive composure cracking completely. "Thank you," he managed. "All of you. You gave me the gift of seeing clearly. You trusted me to actually change things when you had every reason to believe nothing would change. That trust is sacred to me." "You earned it," Elena said simply. "By listening, by acting, by staying committed when it was expensive and difficult. That's what real leadership looks like." After the event, Daniel and Elena sat in the office that had once been Rick's domain, now transformed into a collaborative workspace with transparent walls and employee suggestion boards. "Do you ever think about that night?" Elena asked. "When you heard me crying in the bathroom?" "Every day," Daniel admitted. "It was the moment everything pivoted. Before that, I believed in my systems, my metrics, my vision of efficient commerce. After that, I understood that efficiency without humanity is just exploitation with better branding." "I think about it too," Elena said, "but not as a low point anymore, as a turning point. That was the night my daughter's life was saved, even though I didn't know it yet. That was the night someone finally listened when I couldn't stop crying. That was the night the system finally broke in a way that forced repair instead of just another patch." "Rick was charged with multiple felonies," Daniel mentioned. "The DA's office called this morning. He took a plea deal, 3 years in prison, restitution to victims, permanent ban from retail management." "Good," Elena said without hesitation. "He hurt a lot of people. Justice matters." "It does, but Elena, you need to understand something. Rick was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was a system that rewarded his behavior, that made exploitation more profitable than dignity. If I just fired him without changing the system, someone else would have filled that role and done the same things." "I know," Elena replied. "That's why what you did matters. You didn't just remove one bad manager. You rebuilt the foundation. That's rare. Most people in power change just enough to look good without actually threatening the systems that gave them power." "I had advantages most people don't," Daniel pointed out. "Majority ownership, personal wealth, enough power to force change through resistance. Most people can't do what I did because they don't have those resources." "That's true," Elena acknowledged. "But most people with those resources don't do what you did either. They protect the systems that benefit them. You're the exception, not because you had power, but because you chose to use it differently when you finally understood the cost of your previous choices." They sat in silence for a moment, watching employees move through the store. The afternoon shift was arriving, greeting each other with genuine warmth, preparing for work without the dread that had once permeated every interaction. "Lucia wants to be a doctor," Elena said suddenly, "but she also talks about becoming a CEO like you. She says she wants to have power so she can help people the way you helped us." Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotion. "Tell her that power without compassion is just tyranny with a better title. Tell her that the best leaders are the ones who remember what it felt like to be powerless and use that memory to guide every decision." "I will," Elena promised, "and I'll show her by how I lead here, by making sure everyone who works in this store knows they matter, that their struggles are visible, that someone is listening when they cry." "You already do that," Daniel said. "You've become exactly the kind of leader I wish I'd been from the beginning." "You became that leader too," Elena replied. "Just took you a little longer to get there." As Daniel left the store that evening, walking through the parking lot where he'd first sat watching Elena's exhaustion, he felt something settle in his chest, a sense of purpose that transcended profit margins and stock prices. He'd spent 20 years building an empire measured in dollars and square footage. Now he was building something measured in dignity and justice. The numbers were harder to quantify, but the impact was impossible to ignore. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Board meeting tomorrow. Year 1 results review. You ready? Daniel smiled and typed back. Ready. Bring the real metrics. The next morning, he presented to the board not just financial performance, but the comprehensive well-being assessments Elena had developed. Employee retention up 47%. Healthcare utilization increased, but emergency room visits down 62%. Worker productivity up, while reported stress down. Customer satisfaction at company record highs, and yes, profitability slightly reduced, but sustainable in ways the previous model never was. This is the future of retail, Daniel concluded, not extracting maximum value from desperate workers, but building genuine sustainability through shared prosperity. We'll never have the margins of companies that exploit their workforce, but we'll have something more valuable, a business model that can survive indefinitely because it doesn't consume and destroy the people who make it function. Margaret studied the reports carefully, then looked up with grudging respect. You've proven your point. The question now is whether we can maintain this as we scale, or whether it only works in locations with extraordinary leadership like Elena Morales. That's the challenge, Daniel acknowledged. Systemic change at scale. But I believe it's possible if we commit to developing leaders who understand that their job is serving their teams, not extracting maximum productivity from them. It requires different management training, different promotion criteria, different values at every level. It's also a competitive advantage, Robert Chen noted, surprising everyone. Our employee retention is now the best in the industry. Our recruitment costs have dropped significantly, and we're attracting higher quality candidates because word has spread that we treat people well. This isn't just morally right, it's strategically sound long-term. The board approved continued implementation with unanimous support. Even Thomas Bradford, who'd opposed the initial reforms, acknowledged that the results spoke for themselves. After the meeting, Daniel stood at his office window, looking out over Manhattan. Somewhere in this city and in hundreds of other cities, his employees were working, stocking shelves, helping customers, cleaning floors, managing teams, and now, for the first time in his company's history, they were doing it with dignity, security, and hope that their labor would actually lead somewhere, rather than just perpetuating cycles of desperation. His phone rang. Elena's name appeared on the screen. Daniel, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted you to hear this directly. Lucia's 6-month follow-up appointment was today. Dr. Chen says her heart is functioning perfectly. Normal rhythm, normal capacity, no complications. She's cleared for all regular activities. She's fully healed. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the words wash over him. That's wonderful, Elena. Tell her I'm proud of her strength through everything. I will. But Daniel, I need to tell you something else. I've been offered a position, Regional Director of Operations, overseeing 15 stores. It's a big promotion, more money, more responsibility, but it means leaving Riverside, and this place has become like family to me. You should take it, Daniel said without hesitation. The Riverside team is strong enough now to succeed with new leadership, and those 15 stores need someone who understands what dignity-based management actually looks like. You'll transform them the way you transformed Riverside. You think I'm ready? Uncertainty crept into Elena's voice. I know you're ready. You've already done the hardest part. You've proven the model works. Now you get to scale it. And Elena, remember something. You didn't get this opportunity because I gave you special treatment. You earned it by being an exceptional leader who transformed a broken store into a thriving community. That's all you, not me. You gave me the chance, Elena protested. I removed obstacles that never should have existed. You did everything else. Take the promotion, spread this approach, show other managers what's possible when you actually value the people who make the work happen. 3 months later, Daniel attended a company-wide leadership conference. Elena presented the Riverside transformation as a case study, and her passion and authenticity inspired the assembled managers in ways corporate consultants never could. She spoke about crying in a bathroom, about desperate choices and impossible odds, about a system that had been designed to extract rather than nurture. And she spoke about what changed when one person finally listened and chose action over comfort. The presentation received a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of managers approached Elena seeking guidance on implementing similar approaches in their locations. The cultural shift Daniel had hoped for was accelerating, spreading organically through the organization as people recognized that dignity and profitability weren't mutually exclusive. That evening, Daniel hosted a dinner for the leadership team. As conversations flowed about strategy and implementation, he found himself watching Elena interact with other managers, her confidence and competence evident in every gesture. This was someone who'd been invisible a year ago, whose labor had been extracted without recognition, whose desperation had been weaponized for profit. Now she was reshaping the company's entire approach to human capital. "You did good," Marcus said quietly, materializing beside Daniel. "The board was skeptical. I was skeptical. Hell, half the company was skeptical. But you were right. Treating people with dignity isn't just morally correct, it's operationally superior. Who knew?" "Elena knew," Daniel replied. "Betty knew. Marcus and Sandra and everyone who'd been ground up by the system knew. I just finally listened." "You did more than listen. You acted, at enormous personal cost and risk. That matters." "It was the minimum decent response to discovering you've been causing harm," Daniel said. "I don't deserve credit for basic human decency." "Maybe not. But in corporate America, basic human decency is revolutionary. You've started something that's bigger than our company now. Other CEOs are calling me asking about the model. Harvard Business School wants to do a case study. You've changed the conversation about what responsible capitalism can look like." Daniel shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just stopped ignoring the crying. Everything else followed from that." Years later, when business journalists asked Daniel Cross about the inflection point in his career, he never mentioned the board battle or the stock price recovery or the industry awards his reformed company eventually won. He talked about a bathroom door in a discount store at 2 a.m. and a woman crying because the system had failed her so completely that she couldn't even imagine rescue. He talked about learning that numbers don't cry, but people do. And that when leaders finally listen to those tears, instead of dismissing them as unfortunate externalities, entire systems can transform. Elena Morales eventually became the company's chief people officer, overseeing human resources, training, and culture across the entire empire. Lucia graduated at the top of her high school class and earned a full scholarship to medical school, where she studied pediatric cardiology, paying forward the miracle that had saved her life. The Riverside store remained profitable and successful, a testament to the principle that dignity and efficiency could coexist. The bathroom where Elena had once cried alone became, in company lore, the place where everything changed, where one person's suffering finally broke through the insulation of wealth and power and forced a reckoning. And Daniel Cross, the billionaire CEO who'd built an empire on optimization and efficiency, learned that the most important metric was one that couldn't be quantified: whether the people who kept his empire running could look at themselves in the mirror each morning and see dignity reflected back. He never wore that expensive watch again. Instead, he kept in his desk drawer a framed photograph of 47 employees holding a banner that read, "Dignity Works." On difficult days when the pressures of business threatened to overwhelm his commitment to reform, he looked at that photograph and remembered the sound of crying behind a bathroom door. And he remembered that once upon a time, he'd had the courage to stop, to listen, and to change everything because one woman's tears had finally been enough to break through the comfortable numbness of profit margins in quarterly reports. That courage, sustained through years of challenge and transformation, was his real legacy. Not the billions in his accounts or the stores across the nation, but the proof that systems built on exploitation could be rebuilt on dignity. And that sometimes, the most revolutionary act a person with power can perform is simply to care about the suffering they've caused, and then actually do something about it.